Good evening. This meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for October 4th, 2023 will come to order. Everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Lori.
Chairman Richardson,
Here.
Vice Chairman Aton,
Here.
Secretary Grant,
Here.
Member Moscoso,
Here.
Member Garad, Member Faison,
Here.
Member Perez,
Here.
Alternate Member Childs,
Here.
Alternate Member Rogers, School Board Member Gilbert.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Next will be the approval of minutes of September 20, 2023. Has everybody read the minutes?
I do have a question.
Yes.
In the last meeting, I asked two questions, Brad, and I was hoping you might have the answers to that. Those were in the minutes. Would you like that I ask them now?
I recall one question about a cost of $45,000 budget for water education.
Yes.
I unfortunately didn't get you the answer before tonight's meeting until just before meeting today. But I did receive a response from the Public Works Department in regards to your question last week. And they said that the $45,000 that was identified by you, that are inside the water supplies plan, is specifically for education efforts that they're supposed to use throughout the year. So it's like holding a budget amount for those kinds of education efforts, wherever they might be. They didn't get more specific than that.
Okay. Who would I reach out to get kind of a detailed?
Sure. So I forwarded that email to you only 15 minutes ago.
Perfect. Thank you.
So the contact is on there, the person who provided that response, and that was Ashley Smith.
Okay. Thank you. And my second question, this is about the project that was on Georgia Avenue, or proposed to be on Georgia Avenue, the assisted living facility. I think I asked you, for assisted living facilities, is it necessary to have 2 points of entrances? I wasn't sure if you had a response for that.
I can't recall whether it's required. I don't believe we saw that in the code when we were last meeting looking at that, but I don't have an answer for you tonight.
So would that be in the comprehensive plan?
If there is a requirement, it would most likely be in the code, so I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
Member Faison? Member Faison,
Oh, nothing. Mistake.
your light's lit. Still is.
It won't go out.
Okay.
Okay.
It's like one of those candles you blow and it keeps.
Secretary Grant.
You guys are teasing me tonight.
Exactly. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from September 20th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Vice Chairman Aton. Any other discussion? Okay, roll call vote.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Member Childs,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Moscoso,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Aton,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. Chelsea, are they quasi judicial?
No, legislative, two items, and then one discussion item. It's
Okay.
not either.
Okay, there are no consent agendas, items. There is no old business. First item will be 9A. Brad?
So this item begins on page 9 of your packet. I'm just going to summarize this ordinance. On May 10th last year, the council directed staff to evaluate existing conditional uses within the code and provide recommendations on those which are overly restrictive, outdated, or those which should be classified as limited and permitted uses. Staff is making recommendations per that request in this particular ordinance. You already saw another type of ordinance similar to this on commercial uses. Tonight is an ordinance specifically about industrial uses. On page 11 begins the ordinance. I'm not going to go through in too much detail. It's very short. I do want to point out, though, that on page 17 of your packet, there is a use there called mini warehouse. And you'll see in that row, unfortunately, I don't have the zoning districts on each page here, so you have to go back to see which row, which column coincides with which zoning district. But what I'm trying to explain here is that where we've made the changes in red, you'll see in strike through and underline inside the cells of that matrix there, that zoning matrix, is the use that was previously required to go through a public hearing process, which is the letter C. We're changing that to a letter L to be permitted with limitations. I do want to make one correction on that same row where it says mini warehouse. You'll see one of the cells that still has a letter C in it. We're changing that to an L, and I'll point out exactly what that is. So that's a mistake right there. It should say an L. If you go to the next few pages, starting on page 20, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. In our code, we have the zoning use table, the matrix, but then following that, we have individual uses and where they're located in the zoning districts. And then we have specific definitions or conditions of that particular use. And so, for example, laboratory research and testing, we're suggesting that it would not require a public hearing if it's going to be proposed in a hospital medical zoning district or in the M1, which is the light industrial and warehousing zoning district, and be allowed as a permitted by right type of use. Further down, you'll see mini warehouse. We're suggesting that it would be allowed, instead of being requiring to go through a public hearing, in the M3 infill industrial zoning district and the downtown midtown subdistrict of the downtown mixed-use zoning district, and in the subdistrict called RMU 500 and the regional mixed-use zoning district, to be instead require just conditions with them instead of having to go through a public hearing process. The mistake that I was pointing out on page 17 of your packet has to do with where it states in the downtown mixed-use zoning district. We'll make that change, and we did make that correction in time for City Council's meeting. But basically, in the big zoning matrix for downtown mixed use, we didn't make that. It still says C, and then on the page you see before you right now on page 20 of your packet, it has it crossed out and then replaced with the letter L. So we'll make that correction. You look on the next page, page 21, you'll see the conditions related to mini warehouse, depending on which zoning district they're in. Instead of, again, requiring a public hearing, they'll just have to adhere to these conditions in order to allow that particular use. What that means is those conditions of that use carry with it. So in other words, they come in and want to do a mini warehouse in any one of these particular zoning districts, that have to adhere to these conditions or would not be permitted. And there's no ability to go before the Board of Adjustment to get a variance to that. These run with the use. Further down on page 22 of your packet, you'll see another use, warehousing / wholesale. That currently requires a public hearing if it is in the infill industrial zoning district, M3. We're changing that to limited permitted with limitations rather. With that, that's it. Those are the only changes we're making to industrial uses in the code. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Vice Chairman Aton.
I noticed that M1 and M2 still require conditional use permit. What's the reasoning on why those two still required?
For which use?
It's on mini warehouse. Yeah. Section 4 starts on page 20 of the packet.
Sure. So the comprehensive plan allows M1, for example, in areas that are not designated as with the industrial land use. There was a policy several years ago that was added to the comprehensive plan to address that issue. Actually, even prior to that, there was still a stipulation that if a mini warehouse was proposed in the M1 zoning district on property that it does not have a comprehensive plan land use of industrial, then it would require a public hearing. And the reason is that because sometimes you find M1 light industrial warehouse type uses adjacent to residential areas. That's where we believe that the code was going with that. And then in the M2, that's a heavy industrial use. We decided not to go forward with changing that because many warehouses can include a lot of outdoor storage. And so we decided to keep that as is. If you recommend otherwise, we'll take that recommendation to council. The reason I bring up outdoor storage is because typically if you find that next to or allow it next to residential areas, you definitely want to try and come up with some kind of provisions to address that. And sometimes just a standard regulation or standard buffering or screening requirement might not be enough. Depending on what that outdoor storage is, if it's going to be adjacent to a residential, you might require a public hearing process. So it still allows for that opportunity here.
So there is M2 next to residential also, or is that just M1?
Mostly you see M1, but I believe you will find a few chances where there's an M2. I'll give you one example. I believe there's that one property that you addressed or heard a hearing on called The Cottages last year. That is next to a piece of property. That was a residential development that was being proposed next to a property that was zoned M2.
Member Moscoso.
I see that it says that the city council directed staff to evaluating existing conditional use permits because it seems oddly specific. And I went back and watched the meeting and I looked up the notes, the meeting notes. And the only place I could see where they asked for this was, I guess, Vice Mayor Jordan. He stated the council was being asked to make decisions on too many things related to the conditional use permit. Is that what you're speaking on?
Well, before that, it actually started with the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Did it? Okay.
They made a motion. It was when Woody was on the board, and I remember it specifically taking place at the firehouse across the street. And then the P&Z made a motion to council, and so council acted on P&Z's motion.
But
It was a while ago.
On these specific ones, did they ask specifically for?
Not the individual uses, but for all of the various CUP types to be looked at on a big picture.
Okay. I mean, these are my thoughts on it, is that when someone's asking, when there is a conditional use permit, that gives people the opportunity for it to be on the agenda. And if someone is possibly not liking the project, it gives them a chance to come up and it being on the agenda instead of possibly being told this will never come before planning and zoning or city council. So I want to give the public as much opportunity to have a chance to speak up. Say there's a mini warehouse being built by their house where they would have a chance to say, I'm not sure about this, instead of saying, well, it's already approved. So my position on this would be, I want the public to have as much opportunity to stand up and say, I'm not sure. So I'm a little concerned moving forward.
Member Rogers.
I would agree with what was just said by Member Moscoso, but I also the thing that jumped out at me was the scientific research locations. And where exactly are those going? I find these charts really confusing, but where is that allowed? I mean, how close to normal residential? What was the sign?
You talking about on page 21, the laboratories?
Yes.
So right now they're allowed in the HM, which is a hospital medical zoning,
Okay.
or the M1 light industrial warehousing, M2 heavy industrial, and the infill and PID as well. So some of those zoning districts can be adjacent to a residential. Is your question, where are they specifically?
Well, I guess I wondered to what degree they were being expanded out of areas that were less residential and into areas that were more residential.
I'll give you an idea of where we were going with this.
Yeah, please.
So you have a piece of property that has HM on it, hospital medical. It's a special type of zoning district.
Right.
You're not going to put that in a place that would be inappropriate. So if you're going through a process of rezoning a piece of property and someone's asking to be HM, the staff's going to look at it and make a recommendation based on whether it's really appropriate to put it there, including all the other criteria that we look at in consistency with a comprehensive plan. If it's already there, and it's adjacent to residential, then you would have to have code provisions inside your code in order to address any potential incompatibility of uses. But that zoning district has all the listed uses in there that are permitted, right? So then you just have to have the code requirements to address that issue. We evaluated this, and we thought that, hospital medical zoning district right now allows a hospital by right. So if it's a laboratory is allowed in a hospital, why wouldn't a laboratory also be required to go through a public hearing?
Member Aton,
So
Vice Chairman Aton.
does the ordinance structure, I agree with both points. I agree with the public being heard, which I think is primarily related to residential. But I also, as a businessman, realize the complexity of if I've got something in a warehouse that's zoned M1 or M2 and want to convert it to mini warehouse and there isn't a residential district within half a mile of it, the complexity of going through a conditional use permit and advertising and all the delays. Is there a way to create the ordinance such that it requires a conditional use permit if it's within a certain distance of a residential zoning?
Yeah, we could tailor it that way.
Member Childs.
Now that you brought that up, then would that be still an L because that's still like it's limited with, or it's permitted with limitations or whatever?
Well, the way we would list it generally, and what we've done in others, is we'll list it as limited, and then you go through the conditions, and if they can't meet a particular condition, here's a way to do it, and it could say, go through a public hearing.
Okay. Because I like that you're trying to stay away from residential, just and still allowing public comment where it's near residential, even maybe near residential, because I think that is where most of the concerns are. So I think I like like how you've been pretty reserved or conservative in removing some of these. So I can see that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Member Moscoso.
Does permitted with limitation, does that require a CUP?
No. So the key in the zoning code, will refer you to page 12 of your packet. The very top of that matrix, you'll see the word key, and then you have the initials P equals permitted, L equals permitted subject to limitations, and then C equals condition. So that means a conditional use. And then if the cell is blank, the use is prohibited.
Okay.
Any other questions before you open the public hearing? Mr. Rogers.
I just hadn't quite finished what I was saying. I think that all of us are a little more aware of, experimentation with germs than we used to be. Most of you saw the news in California. Some code inspector noticed a hose kind of sticking into like a little metal warehouse place, and when they opened it up and checked on it, there were like 6,000 mice inside and all kinds of different viruses and bacteria that was being run by the Chinese government offshoot something or other. But I mean, like just absolute craziness. It was like a biomedical laboratory, but it almost looked like a weapons manufacturing unit. Anyway, I guess I'm just saying, it seems to me that whatever's being done with active biological agents these days would certainly be better off separated from large concentrations of humanity. And I certainly think that's all I wanted to say, because I think that we're all a little more nervous and paranoid about that sort of thing than we used to be.
Any other questions of staff? Okay, at this point, I'll open the public hearing. Laura, do we have any cards?
No cards on this item.
Okay. Close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. What is your desire? Member Faison.
Again, quickly, what are our choices here? We can accept, deny, because this is not a quasi-judicial item. This is a legislative item. So what are our choices with this particular item today?
Your choice is to recommend the city council adopt as written, adopt with changes, that you would propose or not to adopt this.
Okay. As I look at this right here, we're talking about mini storages, and we're talking about uses that are already permitted and areas that has already been permitted just simply without a conditional use. And it's only a few areas that staff is looking at changing, and I don't have any heartache with that because they're already permitted in those areas. It's just allowing people to move in those areas or businesses to go in the area with a little less paperwork. Okay, so I'm in favor of moving this forward. Is there any conversation? Someone had mentioned something about a provision for housing. Did somebody want to add that to it?
Yeah, I want to ask, is that correct? Those are already permitted in those zoning districts? What Mr. Faison said?
I don't understand the question.
Can you repeat? You said that the mini warehouses are already permitted?
Yeah, what I was saying was what you're presenting today is changing from a conditional use to a different use in an already permitted area. So in other words, like, I forgot, so on page 21 or 22, was it?
20. You'll see the matrix there on the table on the bottom of page 20.
Yeah, so if we go to page 20 and we look at using laboratory as an example, in the HM zoning district, which is hospital medical, it says C now, which means it's permitted there under conditional use, and we're changing it from a C to a P for permitted use. And so staff is not recommending that we add anything to any other districts, only just changing from a conditional use to either permitted or with limitations. And I agree with that, with those changes. But if anyone has any additional changes or requests, let it be known now before I make the motion that we approve.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, I would like to add, if it's within 500 feet of a residence, then we would have to have a CUP.
For the mini warehouse,
Or for the laboratory. for
laboratory as well?
sure. Mini warehouse, and I'm going to go ahead and say warehousing wholesale.
Okay.
I would request it for all three, just to give people, I mean, we just don't know where this is going to be right now, and I would love to give people a chance, if they disagree, to be able to come up here and at least state their case.
500 feet.
500 feet. That's really not that far.
You look like you're about to press a button, Vice Chairman. Any other discussion? Well, let's understand it. That would take CUPs and put them on the staff to grant them instead of P&Z and council to hear them.
No. I think what's being suggested here is they say, for example, take a look at page 21. Those are the limitations of a mini warehouse. So I think what's being suggested here, for example, is that we add an additional limitation in here, that they have to be 500 feet from a residential. And if it can't, then it'll have to go through a public hearing process.
Is a public hearing and a CUP the same thing, or okay, it is. I wasn't.
Public hearing can require, a CUP, a conditional use permit, will require a public hearing in order for it to get approved.
Vice versa, if you got a limitation that requires a public hearing, is that the same as the CUP?
So if they meet all the conditions of the limitations of the permitted use with limitations, they won't require a public hearing. But if there's a particular condition that they can't meet within there, then there's a process for it.
Okay.
I just want to clarify.
The Ls and the Ps are administrative. The Cs come before the boards for a public hearing.
But if you trigger an L, it becomes a C, effectively, if you can't clear the L.
Yeah, we have other examples like this, other uses that aren't listed here, but in other parts of the code that talk about, for example, a type of use has these limitations. It's allowed in this particular zoning district, and it has to be, for example, on an arterial collector. If it can't, then it has to go through a public hearing process. So there's some examples like that. But it's listed as an L, as a limitation. So just go through that process as long as you can meet all the conditions. It just calls out that one particular condition that they can't meet. Here's a process you can go through because it's obviously going to be located in that particular case somewhere what might be have an impact on the local area.
To summarize Megan's or Member Moscoso's suggestion, Brad, then the L would remain on the chart and there would be a line that would describe the criterion for creating it to have the CUP requirement, which would be within the 500 feet.
Secretary Grant.
Well, you adamant about the 500 feet?
Yes.
Which would be, in your opinion, would be the most nuisance? Laboratory next to a residential or a mini warehouse?
I think no matter what, that's not my decision to make. I think that's the decision of the public. So if they're having something next to them, I don't get to decide whether they think it's a nuisance or not. I think they get the right to come up here and say, I don't like this.
Well, I agree with you there. I have some problems with the distance. With the laboratory, okay, sure, 500 feet. Mini warehouse, no one's there most of the time. I don't understand how it could be that much of a nuisance, but educate me, please. I'm here to learn.
I don't know. I've never had a mini warehouse next to my house, but I would, if it was being built, I would love the option. So it's more about not necessarily what it is. It's more about people having the option to come and say, I don't like this for this reason.
Yeah, I know.
I just don't want to take the voice of the people and not let them have the option to speak.
We don't have too many buffers in this city that are 500 feet that I'm aware of. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There are a few,
Okay.
but it's not regular. I do want to make one comment about what's being suggested. When you change this from requiring a public hearing to just permitted use with limitations, it's hard to go back.
Yeah, I know.
So, we can certainly bring this up to City Council to say that these will require a public hearing because if it's going to be proposed on a zoning district that is located within that 500 feet to a residential, then it would just be the same process we currently have in our code. The difference is if there's a property that is zoned correctly and it's 500 feet or more, then it just has the benefit of not having to go through the public hearing. And I think that's what Ms. Moscoso is
Okay, all right.
proposing.
Member Charles.
I was gonna say, aesthetically, sometimes it can be a problem, but I don't think there's any. It's not like we're saying they can't do it. So just having a public hearing, they come in, and no one shows up. Yay, good for them. No one cares. But which will probably be the case in a lot of times where if it is so far away and it's just not on the right street, but it's within 500 feet, no one may show up, and because they're not even going to see it. So I don't think it's a big ask, and I think, erring on the side of having people be able to voice their opinion on it is definitely a good thing. Thank you.
Member Frez.
I was just wondering, by definition, a mini warehouse, is that restricted to anything that's in it? In other words, are there any limits to what can go into a mini warehouse?
Look on page 22. In the M1 and M3 zoning districts, it specifically says, shall not contain bulk storage or flammable liquids. Shall not, that's warehousing, excuse me. On page 21 of your packet, excuse me, those are the limitations of the mini warehouse. So it says here in the M1, M2 districts, shall be limited to dead storage for use for the general public, and no activities such as miscellaneous or garage sales should be conducted on premises, servicing, repair of motor vehicles. So that's more activities. In the absence of something specifically stated here about any kind of hazardous materials, I think that's where you're going, sir. We would probably rely on the fire marshal, on the type of use or occupancy, or use rather, that's being put there based on the Florida Building Code as well. So in that case, if it's going to be for residential storage or, then it would have certain restrictions on the life safety code and what the fire marshal would say. It's going to be commercial storage. We'll have different standards and requirements. And that'd be true of even a warehouse. There are different levels of what can and can't be allowed based on the construction.
Follow-up question. is it limited in size? In other words, what's a mini warehouse in size?
So the condition you see on F says shall not allow unit size to exceed 500 square feet. And in the, I'm looking at page 21. And if it's in the, that's in the M1 and M2 zoning districts. If it's in the regional commercial, or the M3 zoning districts, or in the RMU 500 district in the regional mixed use, or in the downtown, access to those units doesn't have a minimum or maximum size, it appears, but it does have state that those units can only be accessible from inside a building, which is a different type of mini warehouse than you see in a typical industrially zoned area.
Any other questions? Anyone care to make a motion?
I did have one comment. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It wasn't a question. I just wondered whether, it seems like maybe 500 feet is a bit of a sticking point, and I just wondered whether possibly a compromise might be just 300 feet, which is 100 yards, and it's just easy for people to remember. But
The 500 feet is consistent with the city's notice requirements for public hearings.
noted. I withdraw my statement.
Member Faison.
I move that we approve the ordinance with changes of item 9A, industrial conditional use permit ordinance.
What changes?
The changes of, going to add the 500 feet that she said.
So it sounds like you're proposing approval with the following change, to add a 500-foot distance requirement from residential. And if it can't be met, then it would require a public hearing.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's for all three.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
Second.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Vice Chairman Aton,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes?
Member Childs,
Yes.
Member Moscoso,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. And this will be heard at City Council's next meeting, or October 24th meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Item B.
Item B is the Live Local ordinance. Senate Bill 102, the Live Local Act, was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor earlier this year. The bill includes funding and tax credits for well over $800 million for affordable housing programs, 3 new property tax incentives, including 1 optional tool that we could potentially adopt. It has a land use tool and role of local government by facilitating.
Excuse me, Brad, did we lose the recording, the video?
We've been hacked.
Okay. Proceed.
It has provisions in there about publicly owned land and how the disposition procedures for that, and encourages local governments to adopt best practices. The law came in effect on July 1st this year. On August 22nd this year, the council approved staff's definitions, policies, and procedures to help implement this new law, also known as Chapter 2023-19. The draft ordinance that you have before you adopts definitions and development standards for projects that qualify under this new law. The resolution also that we've included in your packet proposes a checklist to help us certify a Live Local qualifying project. I know you've listened to a few presentations that we've given to City Council, may have attended webinars, and I know you attended a webinar with the City Attorney, Assistant City Attorney about this. I'm just going to give you a short presentation. I'm not going to give you this. I'm going to show you the same presentation I showed to City Council a few months ago, but I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'm just going to show you those slides that are most relevant to Titusville. So just so you know, the law sunsets in 2033. It's self-executing. We do not have to adopt an ordinance. But a lot of jurisdictions are struggling with this and are trying to figure out a way to how they can implement this law within their code system. And every jurisdiction is going to be different. It preempts local governments from enacting ordinances controlling the price of rent under any circumstances. It removes the county and municipality ability to approve affordable housing on residential parcels by bypassing state and local laws that may otherwise preclude such development. Section 166.04151, of the statute states that we may approve housing in mixed-use, commercial, and industrial zoning if at least 10% of the units in the project are affordable. The city has an option to do that. This ordinance that you see before is not addressing that option. The next section in the statute, 7, it states that the city must approve multifamily and mixed-use residential if at least 40% of the residential uses are affordable for at least 30 years. We cannot require change in land use or zoning, a conditional use permit, a variance, a comprehensive plan amendment for height, zoning, and density. Densities cannot be restricted below the highest allowed density, residential density in the city. We've determined that to be 30 units per acre. Height cannot be restricted below currently allowed commercial or residential development within 1 mile of the proposed development, or 3 stories, whichever is higher. We have a height overlay, which is specific to Titusville. It allows for allows development to be up to 75 feet. That's in certain areas of the city. We also have several commercially zoned pieces of property. We have, for example, community commercial zoning district does not have a height limitation, but it does require additional setbacks if you go over a certain height for every foot you go over that height. The law does state that we can still impose our regular development standards. As far as that height overlay, this is the area where our height overlay allows for those structures to be up to 75 feet. And then we did a buffer radius around it based on that mile distance. And so you can see where those areas are located in the city on this map. And that's the area just north of the downtown, the CRA, and an area just south or on bisecting on both north and south side of Columbia Parkway and on the waterfront. If we combine that with areas that have commercial zoning that, again, do not have a maximum height limitation, you can see it pretty much would apply anywhere in the city. We are, the law does ask us to consider reduced parking requirements if developments are located within 1 mile of an accessible transit stop. We should be considering waiver of fees, except building permit fees, and these can include impact fees. All other local standards still apply, such as setbacks. The question is, when someone comes in on a piece of property that's commercial or industrial and try to put an affordable housing project on there, or a residential development on there, at least 40% of those units have to be affordable. That's how they qualify. And then the question is, well, what standards do you apply to that case? Since a commercial zoning district or an industrially zoned zoning district does not allow residential in the first place. So what setbacks do we use? What regulations do we use? What standards do we use? Maximum impervious surfaces and lot coverage can still apply, especially in our area of critical concern, which is our well-field areas. There will be a minimum floor area per unit. We've decided in this ordinance to adopt the R2, that's the multifamily residential development standard. We have a zoning district called R2, and that's what we're proposing to be included in this ordinance to help us be able to facilitate approving a multifamily development on a commercially zoned area or an industrially zoned area or a mixed-use area. Concurrency regulations can still apply, and the policies of the comprehensive plan still apply, with the exception of height, density, and the zoning. We're supposed to come up with policies to expedite the review. Basically, what that means in the city of Titusville is every time we receive a submittal of an affordable housing project, it goes at the top of the list of the reviewers list. We have discussed this local option of ad valorem option with the city of Titusville. We thought that maybe we could probably use this option to maybe only allow it in certain areas of the city and not really allow it in other, or allow anyone to utilize it in other areas of the city as an incentive to try and encourage affordable housing areas in appropriate areas of the city. I've been told since that maybe that's not the intent of the law. So far, I've only identified the city of Jacksonville has adopted this ad valorem option, and they did it blanket throughout the city. So it's something we did get direction from city council to explore, so we are researching this option. And so cities are encouraged to come up with the best practices. We initially thought about using the R3 standard. We believe the R2 is more appropriate. We had issues and questions about how does density play in wetland areas? How does density play in floodplains? Because our code does have a maximum density in each of those. That's the end of that presentation. On your agenda packet, I'm going to go through the ordinance so you understand, and I'll explain some parts of it so you understand where we're coming from. On page 27 of your packet, at the bottom there, section 2, referred to, this is going to be a new article in our code, in our chapter 29 overlays section of our code, and it's going to be titled Affordable Housing. And so it kind of just refers back to that law, provides some definitions based on what's contextual to Titusville. For example, affordable housing would be based, the definition of it would be based on the statute with a minimum period of 30 years. So what that means, what affordable housing units, restricted affordable housing units really mean is not just a price point of a market rate housing. It is units, residential units that are restricted in some way. So in other words, that unit can only be occupied by a household that meets a certain income qualification. And there have to be procedures put in place to help qualify that. So in addition to this ordinance, we have the resolution to certify a project as live local qualifying, but after that, then we'll have to come up with agreements with the property owner to ensure that the units that are considered to be affordable housing will stay that way. And I don't know if that means a monitoring program or whatever that is, but some communities are struggling with that question right now. Further down, affordable housing project, commercial zoning districts. I'm going to refer you to another agenda packet, the previous one, to show you why what we're stating here. But basically what we're saying is that commercial zoning districts shall be as designated in Chapter 28 of our code. Chapter 28 of our land development regulations identify the zoning districts. Height shall be based on what our code says. It's basically shall mean the vertical distance from grade plane to average height of the highest roof surface. That's how our code is defines height. Industrial districts on the next page, on page 28. Again, I'm going to go back to you to show you what we mean by industrial districts. But industrial districts, it refers to, we're referencing Chapter 28, and there's a reason we did that in both the commercial definition and the industrial definition. On the same page, 28, mixed-use development. This is something we struggled with. We went to City Council and gave them a version of this. I've given you a hard copy handout with shaded areas where we've made some changes to this particular definition. That's on page 3 of your handout that I gave you. So based on the input we received from City Council, we decided to make some changes to it, and on page 3 of your handout, I'll just go through that real quick. Mixed-use residential development is we're kind of clarifying what that term is. Excuse me, kind of referencing back to the law. because initially this definition was pulled from our code. We want to make sure that this definition is more consistent with the statute, specific to live local qualifying projects. So it states, shall mean the development of a tract of land, a building, or structure with 2 or more different uses to include, this is the new language, affordable housing and uses permitted and limited in the underlying zoning district. So for example, you get a live local qualifying project on a commercially zoned piece of property, that zoning district doesn't change. So if they are required to put in a mixed-use component, which I'll explain why in this case they will be, they will have to, then we'll determine what, in addition to that residential use, what is that other use they have to incorporate in this development. And so what we're stating here, look at the existing zoning on the property to find out what uses are allowed and work with the applicant on what uses are appropriate there to mix in with this residential component. I'll read further. At a minimum, 65% of the total square footage of the mixed-use development, floor area ratio must be residential. That's consistent with the statute, that 65% statement. But we threw in this word floor area ratio for a reason, because I'll read further. But no more than 80% shall be residential. At a minimum, 20% of the total square footage, the floor area ratio of the development must be non-residential. If you're not familiar with what floor area ratio is, think of an acre piece of property. It's commercial zoned. It can have a floor area ratio of 1. What that means, it can have 43,000 plus square feet, total area of that property, to be built. And then if they can't do it because of parking and stormwater, then it can go up. But they can utilize that full square footage potential. In the downtown mixed-use zoning district, we have areas where there is a floor area ratio allowance of 5. So you can go pretty high. And in some areas, you have a floor area ratio of 0.5. And what that means is you have an acre piece of property, your maximum building footprint can only be half the size of the property, but you can go up, but the total square feet can only be that half. So if you have a multifamily development on a commercially zoned property or an industrially zoned property, the floor area ratio would mean the square footage of that entire, all those buildings, including all the floors. So then the next thing, the mixed use component, you have to calculate 20% of that floor area ratio. And that minimum, minimum of that floor area ratio has to be mixed use. I was still trying to clarify this. We just tweaked this again today. And so we're going to go before City Council next Tuesday to see what their reaction is on this change to this definition here. So we'll open to any suggestions you may have. I'll read further. On mixed-use zoning districts, we are defining those as districts that are in our code, and we've listed them here in that definition. Downtown, mixed-use, and all the sub-districts within it, the urban mixed-use zoning district, shoreline mixed-use district, the urban village zoning district, and the regional mixed-use district, and the Indian River City neighborhood commercial sub-district allows residential and commercial, so we saw that as a mixed-use district. So potentially a live local qualifying project could be on any one of these mixed-use districts that we've identified here in this definition. Further down, the new section 29-146, development standards. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll briefly state here. The land area of the following zoning districts shall be used to calculate the percentage of commercial and industrial properties within the city. So then we identify the different zoning districts. All affordable housing projects developed pursuant to this article shall be required to be mixed-use developments. The reason we say that is the statute does say that if the jurisdiction has commercial or industrially designated properties or lands, and it is below, that cumulative area is below 20% of your city, then a live local qualifying project must have a mixed-use component. And so this ordinance is addressing that requirement. We currently have, we calculated what we believe are commercial and industrially designated areas in the city based on our zoning tool, our zoning table. And so we calculated it out. We are below that 20% threshold, which is why this ordinance that we've drafted before you is requiring that mixed-use component requirement. I would refer you to page, this is in your previous agenda, page 12 of your packet, and you'll see that zoning use table. This is in the previous agenda item. That zoning table, which is in our code on page 12 of your packet, you see the matrix is structured where you have each zoning district is a column and each use is a row. And the columns are categorized based on uses, based on types. So the zoning districts are based on types. You have agricultural and public type zoning districts. You have residential type zoning districts. You have commercial type zoning districts and industrial and mixed use. So that's why we looked at the commercial and industrial zoning districts, added up the cumulative acreage of those zoning districts, and that's where we came up with our threshold, and it happened to be just under that 20% requirement per the statute, which the statute then requires a mixed-use component. So that's what we're trying to address here. On the handout I gave you, I won't go through the rest of it too much, other than to say that, we struggled for, I'll hit on one other part of this, but I do want to tell you that as we went through this, we struggled with several aspects of this to try and answer these questions, such as, okay, on an industrially zoned piece of property and as a mixed-use component, what is that mixed use? Is it retail? Well, we don't allow retail in industrial zoning. Do we allow an industrial use, which is all that's allowed in an industrial zoning district? But how do you incorporate an industrial use as a mixed-use requirement with a residential development? So we included a provision here on that page 3 of your handout, and we stated here, and I should have highlighted that, I apologize, C2 says, the interior buffer between industrial and residential uses shall be 30 feet. I'm open to any suggestions of how we can address that better. On a commercially zoned piece of property, because there's a mixed-use component requirement, you have a affordable housing project or a residential development on a commercially zoned piece of property, and there's a mixed-use component there on a commercially zoned piece of property, it's a little easier, because then you could just look at the underlying zoning district, see what uses are permitted in that zoning district, and a lot of them would complement a residential development, but not all of them. Automotive repair.
Just to go back to the 30 feet, you came to that by looking at the code in the table that had numbers that exist in our code. Could you just explain that?
Sure. So that 30 feet is based on, we have in our current code a buffer matrix, buffer standards between uses. So a residential development next to an industrial development would have to have a 20-foot buffer. And an industrial development was proposed, that's going to be proposed next to a residential development, would require a 10-foot buffer. So we added the two together and believe that came up with this 30 feet buffer requirement between the industrial mixed-use component and the proposed residential affordable housing component on an industrially zoned piece of property. And that's referring to page 3 of your packet, C2. Going back to commercial zone properties, a lot of the uses that are allowed in commercial zoning district could be compatible and appropriate as a mixed-use component with a residential development, but some probably would not. Further down, we stated on that same page 3 in the very bottom there, the commercial component of a mixed-use project shall share the same axis as the multi-family component of the project. So mixed use doesn't necessarily have to be a horizontal mixed use. Mixed use doesn't necessarily have to be in the same building with the residential. The non-residential use could be, it could be horizontal mixed use instead of vertical. You could have one building that's purely non-residential and another building that's purely residential on the same development. Now there is a condition in here on the next page, page 4, that talks about it having to be approved under unity of title. So it cannot be subdivided. well, there were questions about how making sure that we have that mixed-use component as part of this development and not something that just could be built later at some other time and potentially never. So, and then because the statute requires us for a live local qualifying project to be a rental, we believe that the condition here about having it being under a unity of title, which would prevent it from being subdivided, is appropriate. So it wouldn't be a townhome development, wouldn't be a condo development. It would not be have out parcels for commercial uses on it. It would all be a unified development of some sort. So continue on page 4 of your handout. We stated here that the residential density within the project, and I'm looking at paragraph D, shall be a maximum of the highest allowed in the city. We determined that to be 30 units per acre based on the downtown mixed-use zoning district. We didn't state it here because that could change in our code, and that means we would have to come back and change this again. So we decided, or the statute might change. And in fact, we understand that it may change at the next legislature session. So we did determine it in our resolution, which can be much easier to amend if we need to. Maximum height, paragraph F. So we just pretty much reiterated what the statute says and what I showed you in the slides in the PowerPoint. Paragraph G, for developments within the airport or air park height notification zone, that would still apply. They'd still have to get notification. So if they try to propose something that's going to be exceeding a particular height limitation within that airport overlay, they'd still have to get notification or get some kind of approval through the appropriate federal or state process through the airport. And they may not be able to get that height that they're asking for. Paragraph H, this is where I've talked about that unity of title and phasing. And so it should be one unified development built at one time. Further down, paragraph I, open space. So we looked at the urban village zoning district. We thought that that was probably the most compatible or most appropriate, more consistent zoning district or mixed-use zoning district that we have for this type of potential development. So a lot of these commercially zoned and industrially zoned pieces of property are on commercial corridors, and the mixed-use zoning district that is along those commercial corridors is the urban village zoning district. And so we didn't look at the downtown mixed-use zoning district or the urban mixed-use or the shoreline or the regional mixed-use. We didn't think that they were really workable or appropriate. The urban village zoning district was specifically designed for this kind of scenario, a mixed-use development where you could potentially have in the same building or a horizontal development that is an urban compact manner along a commercial corridor of residential and commercial uses. And so then we looked at the open space requirement within the urban village zoning district and recommend that we apply the same standard for this mixed-use development as a live local, for a project that would qualify under live local. What that would mean is that there would be a 25% open space requirement. Now, what the urban village zoning district says, it's not like the open space requirements in there are not like you find in the planned development zoning. If you recall, the Titus Landing project and the Titusville Resort and Destination project that went through the master plan processes off of US 1, they had proposed a 25% open space requirement, which could include civic spaces. It can include improved park areas that don't necessarily have to be where the water percolates. It can include courtyards, things of that nature. So it talks about open space and you can use stormwater and drainage facilities as part of that as well. When we brought that up to City Council, they asked for us to change that a little bit. They wanted to see some more pervious space as part of that open space requirement. So what you see here highlighted is new language, and that's what we'll propose to City Council on Tuesday. And it states the minimum of the total open space shall include at least 50% impervious area dedicated to active or passive recreation. On paragraph J, we've included a statement about a deed restriction. This is where we're going to have to work with the applicant on coming up with an agreement on how those affordable housing units are going to be restricted in some way. And we have tools to do that. Yes, sir.
Did you mean to say impervious or pervious? 50% pervious or impervious?
50% we can, so there's a typo, I think that might be a typo. So a minimum of the total open space shall include at least 50% pervious, I think is what it should say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, on paragraph K, the bottom of page 4 of your packet, no, I'm sorry, of your the handout. This is addressing that statement in the law about having to consider reducing parking if a development is located within a half mile of transit stop. We've included language here which is highlighted here, or shaded, which is new that City Council has not seen and will see on Tuesday. Included and is accessible from the development via continuous ADA compliant pedestrian facility. So if a Live Local qualifying project asks to reduce their parking requirement, and we do have a process for that. We have what's called a development review committee that handles administrative waiver requests to our code specific that include parking, the number of parking spaces or dimensions of parking spaces, and other types of technical waiver requirements, They would go through the development review committee, but this is just another thing that has to be considered now. So this paragraph would be considered in addition to any other criteria we would have as far as any general requests for reducing parking through the development review committee process. If they will have to consider, is the development within half a mile of a transit stop, and can a pedestrian get to it? I've included on page 5 here of the handout, you'll see some statements about the noise. We debated how some of these uses can be compatible with each other as far as nuisances. And then the last section there, expedited review. Before I finish here, I do want to go back to one thing about mixed use. If you go to page 3 of your handout and go back to that definition, mixed use residential development. On page, you can see it yourself. You look on the previous agenda item and look at that zoning use table, page 12 and so on. You'll see, for example, the community commercial zoning district or the regional commercial zoning district, which is CC or RC at the top of that row there. It says zoning districts. And you see the uses that are allowed in that first column. And then if it's got a P or an L or a C, as you learned in the previous agenda item, what's allowed there underneath each of those zoning districts. What we're saying here in this definition is that if the Live Local qualifying project is on a regional commercially zoned piece of property, for example, that the mixed use component can utilize one of the uses that are permitted or limited in that particular column. And so as you go through it, you'll see examples such as adult daycare, advertising agency, animal kennel with limitations, arcade amusement. That's a conditional use permit, would not be consistent. That would not be allowed. It'd be permitted or limited. Art, craft, and hobby, and so on. Retail, car rental agencies, financial institutions. These are built environments. Another one could be, as you go further down, medical office, newsstands. You can see personal services, which are more of massage parlors, pet grooming services, pet stores, restaurants. But then further down, on page 16, you start seeing industrial. There are some limited industrial uses that could be permitted in a commercial zoning district. And then further down on the next page, you'll see mini warehouse is allowed in the RC as a limited use. Remember that those units can only be accessible from indoors. Further down on that same page, page 17, you'll see under civic, public, and institutional type uses, arts centers, community centers. And then further down on the next page, on page 18, you'll see performing arts theater or vocational school. And then on the last page here, page 19 of that zoning table, you'll see public park and community gardens in the CC, but not in the RC. So one question that was brought up at the city council meeting was a public park and whether that could be count towards a non-residential use. And based on what we've written here, potentially yes. So with that, I'll try and answer the questions you have about this ordinance. I know it was a lot of information.
Before a lot of members have pushed the button, Brad, do you honestly think you're in a position to present this to city council right now? And because I watched the meeting, the city council meeting, and they were just as confused.
If we don't have standards in place, we have no choice but to accept an application at a site plan stage and have to process it.
How much time do you have?
The law's in effect already, sir.
I know, but what other cities are approaching it this way?
We've looked at several cities, and some have looked at, we've copied some of their ideas. We've looked at cities down in South Florida, even Melbourne, and some others that are also drafting ordinances in the drafting stage right now.
And you are being pushed to do this as soon as possible because you've got applicants that want to do this. Is that right?
I have a lot of inquiries, serious inquiries, in doing this project, yes. And in fact, what I've emphasized as city council is that this is our priority, is to have these standards in place.
Member Moscoso.
Sorry, I pushed my button early on, but would it be possible to, when you send out the agenda, to have any presentations? Because I really like how you put that together. It was a really good explanation. If you could send those when you send the agenda. And also all of the changes that city council had recommended, if we could get those a little before time, that would be very helpful.
So their meeting last week, or their last meeting, it included just discussion and general questions to council, the staff.
Yeah.
General recommendations. They didn't give us specifics.
Yeah, I see the change from 25%, what was it, to 50% of,
Staff suggestion to respond
it's a
to a
suggestion.
concern that council
Okay.
had. Yeah.
perfect, thank you.
That's what you see here.
Okay.
They're not specific changes made by council
They're gonna be suggestions that you give to them.
to
All right,
address their concerns, yes.
Thank you.
Member Rogers.
I don't want to miss the opportunity, Brad, to say thank you to you and your staff for the massive amount of brain-breaking work this must be. And I hope that, I don't know, you're managing to get some time to go to the bathroom or something like that. I think all of us are peeved by this, to put it mildly. And what I'd just like to start is just that first kind of sentence here in this actual Senate bill here. Quote, an act relating to housing, providing a short title, amending this, and here's the key phrase, deleting the authority of local governments to, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what they're doing here. They're deleting the authority of local governments. Fabulous. Anyway, I wanted to ask, do you see the mixed-use component of this as a desirable or an undesirable thing? Like, is that, do you wish that we had more than 20%, or is it okay that we have less than 20%? Because that's the triggering for that particular component, right?
I interpret the legislature's intent here as trying to not dilute local communities' ability to serve their populations with with commercial and industrially designated areas. So, for example, you've got some communities that have an overabundance of single-family homes.
Yeah.
Right, so maybe 95% of their land is zoned as for single-family. That leaves very little for any types of services to serve those, for those residents. That is a tax base that's based on detached single-family homes. That's not very mixed. That's an economy that could have an issue later based on, because the housing ages. So, and then you see some communities that have, a lot of residential, but then, a mix of commercial, but they don't have any industrial. So industrial provides a pretty significant tax base to local communities, especially manufacturing. And they don't generally draw or require a lot of calls for services. A community that has a good mixture of all of these together is generally more successful and able to have a better balance fiscally and be able to provide those services to their community and have a better quality of life. So I think I just feel like the intent of the statute was that if a local community needs to do this calculation first to figure out whether they're underneath that 20% threshold, because then when live local qualifying projects come in, that it doesn't over time dilute that further to a point where it's unreasonable or unsustainable for the community. That doesn't have those areas designated to provide services to their residents. That's how I see it. I could be wrong. I don't read anything like that, but I generally see that, I think with the 20% threshold, cities or counties that are above that 20% threshold do not have to require a mixed-use component.
They still have to follow the other rules, I mean,
Yes.
obviously, but the mixed-use component is the one thing that that 20% triggers or doesn't
Yes,
trigger.
and so we did our calculation based on the categories of the zoning districts that I showed you. What we categorize in our code currently as commercial and industrial. We just thought that's a pretty easy calculation for us. Now, because the way the law is written, once you make that determination, and if you're underneath that threshold, then you have to require a mixed-use component. So the other city was trying to figure out, how do we address that? So a lot of communities are in that same boat, trying to figure that out.
What is our percentage?
Believe it was 18 or 19%.
If there were some way to boost it above, to get it to 20 or 21 quickly, would you consider that to be advisable or
If you have a
desirable?
recommendation of what we should include in that calculation, we can bring that to city council. We did put in the ordinance that, because land uses change over time, so you've processed several requests to change, for example, commercially designated property to residential to allow, like we did recently with the property of the northwest corner of Dairy and US 1. You've lost that commercial now. That doesn't get included into the calculus.
Right.
And we got a lot of requests like that right now to change commercial to residential.
Right.
So we've included in the ordinance that each time we get one of these requests for a live local qualifying project, that we do that calculation again.
Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering, like, is it seen as desirable to be at or above 20% for Titusville? And if it is, is there some way we can quickly boost, can we get to 20 or 21% of industrial? And I know that sounds kind of crazy. I mean, even by annexation or something like that. But I don't know. Frankly, the mixed use doesn't bother me that much. It's just what bothers me is the height problem. More than anything, that just absolutely galls me. But I guess I wanted to throw that out there in case that's something that everybody's saying, oh my gosh, this mixed use thing is really terrible, which I frankly don't think it 100% is. But, okay, well, how do you get it from 18 or 19 to 20 or 21? Maybe.
Member Faison.
Well, thank you, Brad. Before I go any further today, I want to go ahead and disclose a call that I have received today from a concerned citizen, Mr. Robin Fisher. His concern was in how we calculate our 20%. Per his phone call, he had mentioned that the airport, which is within the city of Titusville, is considered to be commercial, and the airport's calculation is not part of Titusville's calculation of its commercial and industrial. Understanding what that does is extremely important from my perspective, okay? By adding that 20% to the city, that blows away the city's ability to control the mixed use. So, I mean, I know we don't see it this way, but the mixed use allows the city of Titusville to kind of control the Live Local Act. If you add the airport in, it blows that control out of the water. And then people can build whatever they want to build, wherever they want to build, and the mixed use no longer applies. So it's important to understand why that 20% is there. It's important to understand what control the city has by having the mixed use. And so if we were to go above the 20%, this mixed use is no longer applicable, and then developers can just have free reign over the city. Or at least that's the way that I see it. So I want to go ahead and disclose that the phone call did happen today. And as we go forward, I just want to let you guys know what is being said in case somebody comes to talk to you, understanding what that 20% does, okay? Why being below or above that 20% is important.
Thank you for disclosing that, Member Faison. And while this is not a quasi-judicial action, it is known that he is a registered lobbyist. He represents 18 different developers in the city of Titusville. Member Childs.
I was just trying to get around this, Brad, is to understand the mixed-use residential when it comes to, it says, shall mean the development of a tract of land or building or structure.
Can you tell me what page you're on and what section you're in?
The page 3, the mixed-use residential development definition. I just want to understand that part of when it says shall mean the development of tract of land or building or structure of 2 or more different uses. Is that, so I'm just trying to say, so is a tract in our definition, is it just a plot that's, and I know it probably goes into the calculation of later when you say it has to be, like one owner or whatever that terminology was, but is it, so when it comes to that part of the definition, which I think is important because it's the foundation of it is, I'm just trying to understand what exactly that means. So if someone buys a piece of land, does it have to be one lot, or is it like legally, is it one lot, or it's one building? How does this get defined, I guess?
Sure. So someone can purchase several pieces of property and consolidate them. The development, the site plan will be approved only with a unity of title. So in other words,
Okay, all of them have to be.
yeah,
on the same
it'll be
time.
combined under some
Okay.
kind of instrument that'll bind everything together.
Okay, so as long as it, all right, so, and if, yeah, so then they can't just buy all of it and just treat part of it as just affordable housing. The whole development would have to be treated.
Right. So if you think that there could be a scenario where you have a development come in and I guess could do the market rate residential first phase, and the next phase is going to be the affordable housing section, right?
Right.
And if you do that, there's a potential that second phase might not happen, or even the third phase could be the non-residential component. We'll get to that eventually, and that could potentially not happen. What we're trying to say is this is a unified development. Everything should be done at one time.
I got it. Okay. All right, thank you.
We say that further down
You do, I think.
under the next page under H.
Member Moscoso.
Sorry, you mentioned that the zoning community commercial doesn't have a maximum height. Is it possible that someone would build in that zoning?
So currently in that zoning district, any resident or any non-residential or retail development can go in there, and they can go up to, if they go past, there's a minimum setback, of course, and there's a height of 35 feet. But if they go above 35 feet, they can go as far as they want. But every foot above 35 feet, they got to increase that setback. That's how that works.
Okay. My other question is, how does this play out with the county and the city? So say somebody builds something, and I'm thinking like Wendover, for example, that's county, and then somebody in Titusville, they say they build 6 stories. I'm not sure what the code is in the county, but 6 stories. And then a mile from that, somebody wants to build affordable housing. Would that be able to go up to 6 stories? Or do we base it just on the city, or do we
Within the
base it on-
jurisdiction,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, thank you.
But,
Member Rogers.
but the question sort of in a way is what she's saying is, do these giant buildings leapfrog if, once you get, okay, well, we've got a couple over on the water that are really big, okay, well, almost to a mile out, then you put another one that's 75 feet or whatever it is, or 100 or Lord knows. And then once that's there, can you go a mile from that and do another one, within the, does it use each new building successively as the height?
I mean, I could share with you some articles on this. There was a lot of concern in Miami Beach and some other jurisdictions down there about this issue. A lot of places have height limitations in certain districts, and they have transects between, different types of developments for general reasons, for quality of life and aesthetics, and for making sure everything's compatible, depending on how that community defines it. What this law potentially does is kind of upends that. It allows an exception. It preempts local.
It forces an exception, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, if it's qualifying, and I'm going to get back to Mr. Richards' concern. I certainly understand the concern about whether this is ready to go yet or not. We went to City Council with a list of definitions and ideas back in August 22nd. And I was hoping that they would give us direction at that night to go ahead and draft something. What they gave us was direction, approval of our concept, of our ideas. And so I then had something I could use in negotiating with anyone who's want to try to utilize this law, to work with them. Because without it, I didn't have any guidance. I'd be working with admin interpretations all the time, and I can't come before a commission to resolve any of these questions. And it can't even go through a variance. And so I had just that guidance basically I could use. So a lot of communities are struggling with this, what kind of tools they come up with. Some places are coming up with just admin interpretations, and some places are coming up with ordinances. We later decided to come back to City Council and ask them, the same night they told us, go ahead and come up with something and bring it back. And that's what we did. And it was on the top of our priority list. They've also, the council's acknowledged too that, there may be an opportunity to get another bite of the apple at this. If they adopt this next Tuesday, they can come back with another ordinance to amend it. That's possible. But staff's recommendation is to go forward with something, so we have something that we can utilize. And then if we need to tweak it, we can come back with another ordinance.
I think that's wise. I think it's certainly better to, don't let perfection be the, enemy of the good enough. Get something down so that you're not completely unprotected.
The other thing too, it provides certainty for applicants. Because right now, without any kind of guidance, I still at least have some guidance I can use.
Yeah.
That I got from council. Without that, we just have the law. And there are a lot of open-ended questions in that and how that applies specifically to Titusville with our code requirements. And so we're supposed to do an expedited review. And I don't know if we can really meet it, to be honest, because there's just so many open-ended questions. What standards do you apply on a residential development on the zoning district that doesn't allow residential?
Member Faison.
All right, Brett, I have a couple of questions for you. The first one, when we talk about affordability, and we talk about, have we defined, and again, I know that HUD has defined affordability, and it's, again, it can go up to 80% of the AMI. But has the city of Titusville said, okay, when we talk about affordability, we're talking about 30% to 80%. Have they given the range of affordability?
The statute says up to 120%.
Okay, but what about 30%?
You can, but we can't limit it. So by our understanding of the statute, this is something we can look back again, but it would allow a developer or someone who's qualifying under this law to allow restricted affordable housing to 120% AMI.
So, because my issue with that is, right, is if they say, well, we're at 120% AMI, that is affordable, and I want to go forward with that. And then the question goes, well, 128% AMI is, I believe, for a family of 4, it's $70,000 a year. around $73,000 a year. What about those that are at 40% AMI? What about those at 50% AMI? They're still left out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, has the city, in this case, I get the 120% AMI, but have they defined the limit or a requirement? Have they put a requirement in for that? And I guess that's just one question, right? You mentioned about parking, limiting parking, but I believe that limiting parking is already part of the Live Local Act, that they want to reduce the requirement for parking, just to kind of help with affordability. I believe that was already in there. The ad valorem tax. When mentioning the ad valorem tax, we're talking about giving the contractor, the developer, the ad valorem tax, right? That benefit to them.
It'll benefit the property owner.
How?
The ad valorem, I mean, that's their property tax.
Right. But the property owner, so, and again, I know that most of the way we're talking about multifamily and not single family residence. And I guess that's something we want to talk later on about. What about a single family, a single residence?
Yeah, this law, I mean, what we're talking about here is addressing the component of the law that talks about allowing a multifamily development that's rental
Right.
on certain areas of the city that are not necessarily residential.
Right. And because all that kind of rolls into the 30-year affordability period, which kind of what's got us in the problem that we're in right now, is that back in the 80s and 90s, throughout America, there are a lot of 30-year affordability periods that are now expiring, and now we're losing a lot of affordable housing. The last question I have for you is, in your mixed-use residential development, it says here, shall mean the development of a tract of land or building or structure with two or more different uses to include affordable housing. I didn't know that we had a use called affordable housing.
If you recommend changing that to residential, it can.
No, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we don't have a specific use called out as affordable housing, that's correct, yes.
Correct. So we don't have a use called affordable housing. Then that goes back into, again, the affordability period, which goes back into deed restrictions. And, so it kind of rolls back up, kind of rolls upon itself. So if we're going to go with affordable housing as a use, right, which I'm okay with that, then we're talking about deed restrictions.
Yes.
And it sounds like now we're going back to what may be a land trust.
It depends on what that instrument is. So, yeah, we do have some instruments that we've used for affordable housing units related to state and federal programs. But I think we're gonna have to take one of those and kind of tailor-made it for a Live Local qualifying project. It's very unique.
Okay.
But
so I guess just going forward, when we have, I don't mind the use of affordable housing, but we have to kind of define that because that's not defined right now.
I will just comment that the phrase affordable housing was included in mixed-use residential development because this definition, as is noted in the parentheses, is specific only to this law. And so it's not for any other application outside of the Live Local Act.
Okay.
So this section that we're creating by this ordinance is directly tied to the Live Local Act. And so in 10 years, when it goes away, if it goes away, for example, then this would not be tied to that law anymore. And that then, I don't know what the city will do at that point, but that was why the phrase affordable housing was included, is because there has to be an affordable housing component pursuant to the law.
Okay.
But if you have a recommendation to change that, we're all ears.
Well, so just as I think about the use of affordable housing as a land use and also possibly inclusionary zoning, I can kind of see sort of a play off the one and another, potentially.
yeah, so the inclusionary zoning and housing, we did receive directions from City Council to go forward and do a study related to that, a report with a potential, at the end of the project or the program, adopting an inclusionary housing zoning ordinance and/or potentially a linkage fee, an impact fee. But that would be something that would potentially be applicable to Yeah, all types of development, residential development types, not specifically apartments or even live local
Correct.
qualifying. So it really depends on what comes out of that study.
And that's why I was just saying, not necessarily scrapping right now the affordable housing use case. That's all. Again, this is potential later on. Once we move on to that, the inclusionary zoning does not apply right now to live local. But I was just kind of hanging on that affordable housing use. That's all. To be used outside of live local.
Member Moscoso.
Thank you. So I've been reading about what other cities are doing as well. And one of the things that I found interesting is there have been applications, like in Osceola County, to convert hotel rooms into affordable housing. So that's something we're going to have to be thinking about as well. But I also saw that in the city of Doral, because all the cities are kind of being affected by this, they put a development moratorium on certain areas. And so I see two options, because I feel like we got this package on Saturday and we're expected to. I agree with you. I think it's a lot, and I think I'm not sure how many applications we have right now, but I see two options. One is to table it and give us at least another week. I would hope in that week that we wouldn't be flooded.
It'd be
with
2 weeks.
2 weeks flooded with applications coming in. I think we could do our due diligence and actually read through it and see what other cities are doing. I don't personally feel comfortable making a decision on it. The other option is to look into a development moratorium, which would stop development in certain areas. And I would propose to possibly do that around where like Harbor Point is, where our big buildings are. So I don't know if we can do it, but within a mile of these certain buildings, let's put a development moratorium on it for a certain amount of time until we can figure this out. And that would at least stop. The issue is the height, I think, for most of the people in Titusville. We don't want to see, like you mentioned, this leapfrog where we're going to have 6-story buildings.
Yeah, we'll be Daytona Beach when we're done.
Yeah, and so at least until we understand this, to either table it or to see if we can do a development moratorium like Doral County has done, and just until they're doing that just until they can understand what this is. And I think the areas that we would request that are not areas that we're probably going to get applications, but it would protect us just in case. Now, I don't know much about it, and maybe, Brad, you could speak to that, but that was one option I saw as well.
What I read there was an article about what Doral is doing. I have to read it again, but I thought it was like a blanket moratorium, which is pretty significant.
6 months.
Yeah, and that's not accepting any kind of development. I'm not sure how successful they'll be in enacting something like that.
I think they did, maybe a blanketed one, but when I looked up, is it possible to do just a certain area? Because I was looking up different cities were trying to do specific areas. I don't want to stop development in all of Titusville, but I would just really love to protect those places that have high buildings so that wouldn't spread until we understand this a little bit more.
Member Rogers.
I was just going to ask for clarification, Brad. Do you agree with Mr. Faison that it's a good thing to have the mixed use, that gives the city of Titusville more, I don't know, more say over what goes where and how big it is and how much impact it has?
I mean, I've expressed to you what I think the intent was, and I can understand it. Communities that become predominantly one type of use, they have trouble. They have issues. You want to diversify your economy, and so you want to diversify your land uses too, to allow that. And so allowing a lot of residential development on what is currently zoned industrial or commercial takes away from that. So if you require some kind of mixed use component, at least what you're trying to do is protect some of that and not eliminate it so drastically. I think that was the intent. And I would concur that that's probably a reasonable idea. Whether To answer your question, I think it's important to protect the land uses, the non-residential land uses that you have in order to serve your community,
Right.
to diversify the economy. What that threshold is, I don't know what's the magic
Right.
threshold
But at
is.
the very least, it's not, it doesn't go, it prevents this from going 100% one way. I see. Well, I was just going to add, I was kind of doodling, thinking about, and I'm afraid this is going to sound probably, I don't know, kind of one-sided, but, or maybe not very well balanced, but I was thinking about the kind of shops that I like in an area. I like a bike shop because I'm a biker. I like a cafe because I like coffee, or food, and cafes. And, there's a really cool little, local arts and crafts shop down in Cocoa Village and, brew pubs. We've got one right here already. But small grocery stores, maybe small gyms or small plant nurseries or music shops, although people probably just buy stuff online these days. I'm kind of out of touch. But anyway, I do think that, there are things that you can put into mixed use that make a place more vibrant and that attract people from outside that area, and give it life. So I do think that's a positive sometimes.
Vice Chairman Anton.
I too got a call from Robin and actually a call from Mr. Oliver in the audience, but my questions really didn't have any relationship to that. I had two based on things you said, Brad. Is the application process such that they actually apply under the Live Local Act, and so you said this applies when it's that application. So we're not doing anything to limit or restrict the way it used to work. If, say, somebody wants to build an affordable housing project on a commercial, but they come to us for a comp plan revision and a zoning revision so that they can build it on commercial after, assuming we approve that still all works the same way. It doesn't still work the same way.
We cannot bring this back to you for a public hearing for a land use change. So all that we'll receive is a site plan, and we have to administratively review it.
No, that part, so my concern is if we implement this, do we go, we all agree we need more affordable housing. Are we going backwards in anything that, assuming before July 1st when this went into effect, are we going backwards on the ability to attract affordable housing because of this ordinance as it relates to the Live Local Act?
I don't think so. I think what this law was responding to were the rejections that have been happening. You get a request for a proposal to put in an affordable housing project or a multifamily project on a piece of property that may be zoned commercial. I'm not talking about Titusville, I'm talking about anywhere else in the city, or the state rather. And the neighbors object to it because they don't want that new land use there. We've seen it. We've had a few examples where residential was proposed and we want to keep that commercial there. And so some of the objections that were expressed were because we don't want low-income housing people living there, or maybe the proposal was explicitly an affordable housing project. We don't know. But that's what this law, from what I understand, was reacting to, was to allow for those properties generally that are commercial in nature or all industrial in certain areas that could really support residential, and not have to go through that public hearing process and be denied because of what they're proposing to do. So it's a workaround. That's what the state was intending here.
Okay, so I guess I'm still not understanding. So if there's a piece of property and they wanted to do 100% residential, not mixed use, affordable housing on that piece of property, zone commercial, and we've had projects like that. They weren't necessarily affordable housing, but we've had projects where they requested the comp plan change and they requested the zoning change, and it went through, and they're building those projects.
You're saying, so they do have the option of going forward with us with a land use application or rezoning
None of that
application.
change. They can still do
Yes.
all that stuff. It's
That
just
process,
not
that is always an option.
Okay.
to go through that public hearing
So
process,
we're not going
yes.
backwards.
No,
as
sir.
it
No, I
relates
understand
to
your
that.
question now.
And then my other question related to the 20% that's been talked about here by a couple of the members. It seems like when we're right on that edge, how does this change if either that goes away, or do we have any visibility? You mentioned that there may be another change coming through the legislature and they change it to 15% or 10% or something that we clearly don't meet the threshold for. How does all this change?
So we tried to make general references back to the statute so that in the intent there are changes like that we wouldn't have to make amendments to this ordinance. But in some cases, we had to restate something that was specific to Titusville to address what was being stated in the statute. So for example, that 20% we stated on page 3 is stated in the statute. So if it does change and the legislature comes back and changes that threshold somehow below or above it, we'll probably have to come back and amend this ordinance.
Okay, Member Moscoso, I'm going to stop the discussion because we have not opened the public hearing. So I'll at this point open the public hearing. Lori, do you have any cards?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Cole Oliver.
Your mic is not on.
Apologies. Good evening, Cole Oliver, 1901 South Harbor City Boulevard, Melbourne. First I want to congratulate staff on, a tremendous task to try to distill the law and your code and bring forward what they have. I think there's been a lot of progress made. 2 recommendations, one a cleanup item and one kind of to the discussion on the mixed-use development provision that we're talking about. On page 4, item I, sub 2, the very last piece says Division 2, operations and maintenance. I believe that's actually Division 3, but I think that one's pretty minor. Hopefully that's not too controversial, but it's still the operations and maintenance part. And then to the point on the mixed-use residential development, my question would be is, as the non-residential uses are defined, those uses that are commercial, industrial, and those in the recreational district, if I'm following it correctly, is how is the floor area ratio defined in the event that you have an item that's not your typical floor area ratio component, meaning it's not a building. Like if it's a public park, there's no building there, there's no floor that you're actually measuring. And how, does that work together with the standard of the 80%, no more than 80% on a mixed-use development or a multifamily development where you do have a typical measurement of a floor area ratio. And, kind of just your typical, just to make math easy, and I hate doing it in public, say there's 100,000 square feet of floor area that is done in the apartment building. Well, that means you have to have a 20,000 square foot commercial building, or does that mean a 20,000 square foot park? Where's that interplay? I don't know the answer tonight, but I do want to first off, compliment staff on what they brought forward to you all. I think it's a great start and gives them some direction as to how to handle projects if and when they come forward. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. Any other cards?
Yes, Stan Johnston.
Yeah, I have a handout, I'd like a handout description before I speak.
You've got 3 minutes.
I don't want the handout to speak before I speak. I have a handout for you guys to receive.
Where's the handout?
That's what I'm asking to be
Okay.
distributed.
Are there 2 handouts or 1?
One handout.
1 handout.
Isn't that fair? I think.
Go ahead and get up and speak.
I'm gonna wait till the handouts get it before my 3 minutes starts.
Start the clock as soon as he gets up and speaks.
Okay. My name is Stan Johnson. You know my name, and I know you resent me.
I didn't appreciate what you said, Mr. Richardson, because I think I should have my 3 minutes. And people should have their handout. So the handout I gave you is something that September 6th is my business card, and it has 20 items on it of importance that has to do with the city of problems with the city of Titusville. Now, this has to do with what I'm talking about is right here, is I want to talk about problems with the city because these 20 items, which a number of them have to do with what we're talking about. Number 15 says refusal to hire a PE to dispute my findings. Now, when I speak to you, I'm a registered professional engineer, and I've got some expertise. I work for the city, the county, and so forth like this. In this particular item that's being proposed, I remember what was proposed and what was used by federal government to satisfy affordable housing. You remember what it was? Subprime loans. That cost us almost $1 trillion and part of it, well, actually it's over $1 trillion in bankruptcies and so forth that this government had to spend to support it. So if this is coming from the state of Florida or somewhere like that, I'd like you to have a little bit of thinking about what do they really know what they're doing? And in this case, is the city of Titusville qualified to handle this? Have they been handling things that they have now? Right now, is that what I'm sharing with you is this list of items that I've given you, what's on my business card, is those are items that the city is not handling well. And I give my PE license to that. And the city of Titusville will not give a PE license to dispute me. You've got problems. You've got big problems. And this thing right here that for example, we were told by staff that we're working on golf courses going out. And we're working on it. And now look what's happened. Look what's happened. We had how many years did we have to formulate that? And now it's bungled. I see this item as another big thickness of things that the city can't handle. The city has trouble handling what they have right now. And I give you an example of handling things is number 10, withholding of flood zone information, and they had to pay $80,000 for a correction of something they made a mistake in, as far as Baker subdivision and the flood zone. The flood zone's wrong. So I object to this particular thing because I don't think the city can handle it. I don't think we're staffed to handle it. I don't think you guys understand it. Thank you. I refuse it.
Any other cards?
No, sir.
Okay, back to Member Moscoso.
All right.
I didn't forget you.
Brad, I know that you mentioned there are many people are interested in submitting applications. Do you have, between now and 2 weeks, do you personally feel that we would have someone submit an application for this?
Yes.
And can I ask how many?
I have one very serious inquiry and a second one that wants to meet with me.
Okay, thank you. And then I have another question. This is on page 25. And it's item B. So it says all multifamily residential development standards described.
I'm sorry, page 25 of your packet?
Of the packet, I'm sorry, yes.
That's a second page of the agenda cover sheet. I'm sorry.
Hold on, let me see. Yeah. Sorry, 28, is that what I said?
Page 28 of the packet?
Yes.
Okay.
It says all multifamily residential development standards described in the code, except as described in this division, including but not limited to access management. Could you explain what, could you explain that section to me and specifically what access management means?
So access management, number of access points, driveways, width of those driveways, those standards and parking and landscaping, all the other stuff that's listed here, those might be specific in our code depending on the type of use that's being proposed. So what this is saying is it's like a catch-all that everything else we've identified in this ordinance can apply for that because of this unique situation. And then that paragraph says everything else in the code is going to apply that's not stated here, basically. So, for example, if a residential development has a certain standard for access management, length of driveway, width of driveway, the parking number, spaces, whatever that might be, landscaping requirements, that's going to apply. The mixed-use component might have to adhere to those other standards. But what this is specifically saying is that here, we're going to look at our residential development standards to allow this residential development on property, again, zoned commercial, industrial, or potentially something else. Because typically in those two zoning districts, commercial and industrial, we don't allow residential. So this is saying that we're going to look at what is relevant to a residential development to approve that development there.
Okay.
In the site plan process, correct.
All right, let me think about that.
Any other discussion? Vice Chairman Aton.
I was curious about a couple things on it was item C on page 3 of the handout. So you described earlier that I understand the zoning table applying to the uses. The one that confused me though was that it seems that if it was a conditional use, then it's not permitted at all. You can't even apply for a conditional use?
No, because then that would be approving a live local potential project through the public hearing process. That would be in violation of the statute.
Okay, so that's why it is. It's not necessarily, and then on the other one is that they have to share the same access. If this is like a huge project, seems like it may not necessarily be beneficial for the residents that all the commercial traffic is routed through there, but that's a blanket, has to be the same access, or is that something that's more administrative, site plan oriented?
So we believe that the if it's going to be a mixed-use development, instead of every use going to have its own access point, that it should have a shared access point. We see that with mixed-use developments. Urban Village encourages that, sharing few access points for all the uses that are happening there. We did one recently where there was a PD for a particular property on Columbia Boulevard where they were having a multifamily development behind the strip retail that they were proposing or leaving out for future development along Columbia Boulevard. But both uses are going to share a couple of driveways. And that can work because that limits the number of access, too many driveways going on a major road. So we didn't see any issue there with, as far as a commercially zoned piece of property, having a mixed-use component, having that requirement.
Member Rogers.
I was just going to ask, what was the name of the Doral that did the moratorium? Is that a potential way for us to buy some time? I mean, for a short period of time within the city limits of Titusville, so we can kind of like figure this out better?
It's possible. I think that what I read, and I have not seen the specifics of what that law or the moratorium that Doral did. I just reading the article. Just in the face of it, looks like they could be open for a lot of challenges doing something like a blanket moratorium like that. It has to be very, the moratorium law is very specific.
Well,
We did it once before for golf course redevelopment. We did that once before a few years ago for golf courses.
Yeah.
Only because we didn't have any standards in place to address a scenario such as a redevelopment of a golf course. And we did that for about a year. But you can't, if we go down that route of trying to come up with some kind of moratorium on to address this issue, it has to be very specific and has to be defensible. And that's certainly an option City Council could consider.
I understand defensible, and frankly, you can't put it off forever. But I do think, and I think a year is too long. But I just think, this is like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah.
And the implications are
Exactly.
practically eternal.
The implications of not doing something are pretty bad because what we have right now is just the law to go by. And if I get a site plan submitted under the live local law, we'll just have the law to go by to address it. And I don't have criteria to tell me which multifamily standards should I utilize. I don't have anything right now other than this guidance from council. At least I have that. What parking standards should I apply on a residential development on a zoned commercial property? So it's just so many open-ended questions open up for challenges, and I have no ability for a recourse to come to a public body to address those questions. And that's why we're suggesting this ordinance.
Would not the moratorium, I'm not saying that the ordinance is terrible, I'm just saying, would not the moratorium basically say, well, come back in 3 months? I mean, like, because we're not doing anything right now, and we will provide you with something that's kind of more of a, am I misunderstanding what a moratorium does?
Go ahead.
So in an analysis of the Doral moratorium, even the city attorney for Doral wrote a letter to the Doral's mayor and council members stating, in addition to the potential takings and Burt Harris claims, it is important to note that the Live Local Act includes an express preemption. Because of the above, the city council should also be aware that a potential litigant challenging the moratorium may argue that they are entitled to award of attorney's fees pursuant to Florida statutes. So it sounds like even the attorney had reservations and was inclined to discourage their city council from doing that, but legal advice isn't going to prevent a city council from doing what they think is right for their community. And so, you can do something, doesn't make it right, but I do believe that we have had discussions about the potential for a moratorium, and I do not believe that my office would recommend to our city council that doing that would be in the best interests of the city because of everything that Brad has said, because the law has expressed preemptions, and because it's just going to kick this can down the road to do what we're doing now. And I would rely on Brad's statements that there are applicants that are going to be coming forward, and not doing something now is probably more dangerous to the city than moving forward with an ordinance that may be amended in the future.
The can just came out of the can factory. We're not kicking the can down the road. We need adequate time to understand everything, and
You
so
may
does
make
city
that
council.
recommendation. I'm just letting you know where we're coming.
Are you through, Member Rogers?
In many ways.
Member Faison?
This thing is so confusing on a lot of levels. First and foremost, a lot of this development that we're talking about only pertains if they do the development under the Live Local Act provision. So they can still do development how they normally have been doing business, but if they want some of those tax dollars or those incentives that come with the Live Local Act, then there's ways that they have to do that. And hence, this is their way. This opens the can. This opens Pandora's box for developers to go into a community and do whatever they want to do in the absence of further instructions. So if we don't give them instructions, if we don't give them parameters for which they can work on, they can just do whatever they want to do. And so I'm encouraged that. I know you want to speak, Brad, but just 1 second. So there's something that keeps being talked about, which is AMI, all right, which is the the adjusted median income of Titusville, but they never say what that number is. Brad, do you know what that number is?
I don't know it offhand, but I know we're supposed to look at the metropolitan area.
Okay.
Figure that out.
So it's $86,000 for a family of 4. Now, the AMI is adjusted based on the size of your family. So the AMI, so that what they're saying is that the average family of 4 in the city of Titusville or in Titusville, Melbourne, and Palm Bay, they make $86,000. So I want you guys to understand what 120% of that actually is and what they call affordable. It's $103,000, $103,000 for a family of 4. So when I ask the city, does the city have a base of what they call affordable? The answer is no. So what these people are coming in here doing or looking at doing is building units for the bottom person, the bottom family of 4 that makes $103,000 a year. And they're calling that affordable housing. Yay. So when we go above 20%, the mixed use is going out the window. They can grab any commercial property, any industrial property, build units at 30 units per per acre, at a base of $103,000 for a family of four. And they say that we're meeting the intent of the Live Local Act in the state of Florida.
Amen. Preach, brother.
If we're not understanding what they're doing, the purpose of the 20%, the purpose of the mixed use, then we're going to get steamrolled. If we don't do something, we're going to get steamrolled with a lot of development that's not going to meet our current residents right now, which is who we are here to support, our current residents. I read an article the other day, and please forgive me if I get these numbers wrong, but there's more housing available for the top 80% of America than there is for the bottom 20% of America. And I believe the numbers was about 1%. There's 1% of housing available for the bottom 20%, 1% of housing available for the bottom 20%, but yet there's so much housing available for the top 80 that they can't fill it all. And so if we allow this stuff to just come in here, we're going to end up with a bunch of units for people that can't afford it, and we don't even have the population to fill it. So anyways, I just want to make sure that you guys are aware of what Titusville AMI is, because you hear it over and over and over again. The number is 86,000 for a family of four. And that when we talk about the Live Local Act, we're talking about building buildings that are for people, for a family of four, that makes $103,000 a year. And so that means the people that we are here to try to support and help are still not getting the support that they needed.
Member Moscoso.
I was just going to say, I find it really difficult. We want to give parameters, but I think we're getting it. But I was at the city council meeting, and I think it's a lot to take in. So I don't understand how we can give parameters if we don't completely understand. And I understand that there is we need to move fast, but I also think we need to really understand this as well. We already have, and this number is possibly off a bit, around, I want to say, Brad, you can correct me, around 7,000 units that are already approved right now for housing between all the new developments, Brookshire, all of these. It's around 7,000. And then we're talking about opening it up for so much more. And I think we need to look at, does our city have the capacity to handle this? Do we have the services available? Do we have the schools? Do we have, everyone's scared. There was flooding the other day. I was scared what was going to come up on the road. I think these are questions that we need to have. It's not just an issue that Stan gets to address. It's an issue that I think we all have to discuss before we move forward. And so I don't like to act in fear and rush it. I'm asking that we take at least a week, 2 weeks, to figure this out.
Are you making a motion?
Yeah, I make a motion to table
2 weeks.
These two ordinances. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Motion to table is not discussable?
Okay. One ordinance?
There's one
two?
ordinance and there's a resolution that's accompanying with it. But if you table this, you're basically providing no recommendation to city council.
That's right.
I just want to emphasize that I know you're confused by this ordinance, but I feel it's very important that we adopt this. Not having this, I would rely on the statute, and we cannot deny an application that qualifies.
We just received our packet finally on Saturday.
I understand, sir, but
We have not had enough time to review the whole thing. We have a motion on the table and a second. Lori?
Secretary Grant,
No.
Member Faison,
No.
Member Childs,
No.
Vice Chairman Aton,
No.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Moscoso,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. The motion fails. Member Childs.
So yeah, before just break it up a little bit. I'm doing business cards all wrong. Thank you, Stan. but another thing. So I agree. I think we need something, but my question, and maybe this will help too. I don't know, but if you move forward with this and city council says, yeah, well, we're adopting this even with changes or whatever, could we still go ahead and have another in 2 weeks? Go ahead and review this again and make more changes, or we can't?
Well, no, the commission, like you're doing that with other ordinances, the ADU, accessory dwelling unit, you can ask to revisit an ordinance or a particular section of the code as part of an agenda item to discuss it, and then make further recommendations to city council.
You could even
It's-
make that part of your
yes.
approval motion, that you motion to approve, that city council receives your recommendation to approve, and then also ask council for permission to revisit certain aspects of it, or all of it, or whatever. But you could put that in your motion so that council can hear everything that you've discussed along with a recommendation. That's a possibility.
And I guess that's always that's always our concern too, is like that they'll hear all of our points that we're, I think our point is we don't really know what our points are. But I don't know. I'm just saying, I mean, I would lean towards, I think we do need something. I would hate for something to come through and it does get approved and we have no say in it. I just don't, yeah, I don't know how to cover everything right now, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm just trying to. I think it will make. Well, is there any other discussion on that? Is anyone else like that idea of? All right, I make a motion that we accept. Is it so 9B? Live or recommend approval to City Council for 9B Live Local Act ordinance and resolution with the stipulation that City Council would throw it back to us to review this again at our next meeting or whenever the next time we can review this.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second for discussion.
Okay, any discussion?
You know,
Member Faison.
yeah. I know that this is definitely rushed. I know, and I wish we had more time to look over this. I really do wish we had, but unfortunately, this isn't the fault of staff. The state of Florida did this to us. The state of Florida opened that can and shoved it down and said go, and every city, every municipality is now working feverishly to try to find out what they're going to do about this. So this isn't staff's fault. I think we need to put something in place versus nothing. And this is at least something in the meantime while there's still more looking to be had. I don't necessarily say like agree with this, but I agree with putting something in place. Because in the absence of it, the Pandora's box, as I call it, is wide open until we put a lock on it. Okay? So
Member 8, hey, John. Vice Chairman.
It's okay. I don't care about that. I agree with Member Face, and I think I unfortunately I think this is a living, breathing thing on our side, and I get the sense it's probably living and breathing on the other side. It's a little bit of a chess match here, and so I'm not sure exactly. Hopefully everybody's intentions are great, but I don't know that that's the case. Is there a way, as a part of educating ourselves, that as staff, I get the sense, or at least I would think, that as applications come in, we're going to learn things about, oh, we wish we should have addressed that, or maybe we overreached on this one, or whatever. Is there a way that on a regular basis we could get some view into that process, so that, or our staff reports or something, so that when this does come back around, we've got some visibility into, how close we got or how far we missed the mark, kind of a thing?
We can certainly bring up to the commission, we come up with any hurdles or stumbling blocks through the process, and come back to you and tell you what happened. Certainly, we're going to come back to you when we have issues applying this, to come back to you with recommendations to City Council to go ahead and go forward with changes. I suspect there will be changes to this, and we're certainly going to see some changes in the legislature, I would think. So it's going to come back again.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're in a ready, shoot, aim kind of thing right now, but it's better than not shooting at all.
Would anybody else like to disclose they spoke with Robin Fisher or Mr. Oliver? No. I just want to make sure. I think we're even having a difficult time discussing what motion we're making. That's how much we don't understand it. We're fumbling through what motion we want to make. That should tell you everything that we don't understand it. My question to you, Brad, is if we table it, will City Council, will they vote on it next week?
They could.
Judging from the amount of questions they had at the last meeting, they may not.
So can we discuss if we move forward, what would be, before we just randomly make a motion, can we actually discuss what the motion would be and fully understand it? I'm not personally understanding.
I think there's a motion on the table
Yeah.
right
Is there?
now.
Okay. Can you say your motion again?
To recommend approval to City Council as written, basically the ordinance and resolution
With no changes.
with no changes.
You also added with requests for P&Z to continue
Yes,
discussion.
with that stipulation that
With-
it come back to us for review at our next meeting. That's still a request, and City Council can just take part of it or do whatever they want, obviously, and they don't have to give it back to us. But I think they'll see that we need to do something right now, and I think they probably, after, if they hear our recommendation that we need to review it still again, just to make sure that we actually haven't covered everything, that they'll see that that's a smart move to let us review it again and give them another recommendation, maybe more specific recommendation.
Just a week ago, we weren't afraid, and then today we're afraid. So I just think we need to consider that,
Well, I've been afraid all year.
how fear plays into this.
Member Press.
Yeah, I think this thing has a lot of moving parts, and this needs to be a dynamic process because there's so many unknowns. And like we've just stated, I think things are going to be sort of flushed out as time goes on. And I think what I'm really saying is I think it needs to be communicated to council that we need to be on top of this and flush things out as they come along so that the next applicant that comes down the line, we're a little more prepared to address the issues that we're not ready right now to address.
Member Faison.
So, personally, this is my personal opinion, right? Is that if there's city tax dollars that's going to be a part of this, if there's city tax, so there's not an abundance of money in the Live Local Act. So there's not a lot of development that's going to be done under the Live Local Act, to be honest with you, because there's not a ton of money from the state, not a ton of money from the city, not a ton of money from the county. So, those opportunities aren't going to be that many. And if so, I get the impression that there's somebody chomping at the bit to get on board. And if there's nothing in place, they're going to be able to push forward with their thing. And there's not going to be that many other Live Local Act projects. Now, there'll be more projects, but not necessarily Live Local, to come down the pipe. And they've probably been chomping at the bit for this project for quite some time. As soon as it came in July, I'm pretty sure developers all over the state were ready to jump on this, just waiting for that law to pass, and they were ready to move. And local municipalities had nothing to do but just say okay and get steamrolled. Again, as member Rogers stated this morning, the whole point of the Live Local Act is to remove the power of the cities. Delete the powers of the cities. And right now that power resides with us right now and able to at least enact this right here.
Okay.
Can I make one response to Mr. Fason's comment? A live local qualifying project doesn't necessarily have to use any kind of public monies or incentives or tax credits. It could be a private endeavor where they are voluntarily restricting a minimum 40% of their units for affordable housing. Now, at 120% AMI, that's still a pretty significant rental. So I think you're going to see, we're seeing a lot of interest. I'm getting a lot of calls about this on specific properties. And I know others, I've heard from other planning directors in Brevard County have also heard that as well. So there are definitely a lot of interest out there in utilizing this law.
Any other discussion? We have a motion on the floor and a second. A motion was made by Member Childs, seconded by Vice Chairman Aton. Lori, roll call, please.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Moscoso,
No.
Vice Chairman Aton,
Yes.
Member Childs,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
No. And I guess a disclosure of a no vote is I don't think we're prepared for it. There's a lot of things the city does not know. And that's incomplete work as far as I'm concerned. Member Moscoso, do you want to state your reasons for voting no too?
Yeah, I would mirror that, as I don't think we have enough information, and I don't feel comfortable voting on that until I do.
Okay, I think I'll call a 15-minute break before we just go to the next item.
You need a gavel.
Stan Johnston, and you have that same handout. It applies also to this agenda item. And this is over a year old. It says here, fake survey for SNJ Oaks. It says fake survey. And then you can use a different word. You can use imaginary survey. In this case, on SNJ Oaks, I've been a surveyor for over 25 years. I don't have a license now for that. It's an inactive license. But there's the contractor survey, and I look for the monuments for the northwest corner, the southwest corner, and the southeast corner. They're not there. They're shown on the drawing, but they're not there. For the northwest corner, the northeast corner, the northwest corner, it shows a 4x4 concrete monument. It's not there. It's an imaginary survey. In fact, it is on March the 10th of this year. Now I'm going back actually over 2 years ago. So on March the 10th of this year, Brad Parrish and Mark Jones and we met on this at the request of Brad, and he politely showed me that he agrees that the survey has a serious error in the right-of-way of Elizabeth Avenue. This is SNJ Oaks, of a bust of 3 feet. The survey says it's 53 feet, and the actual width is 50 feet. So we have a survey that is imaginary, and it's still approved by city, which and approved the plans and the preliminary plat. All of it's wrong. So I don't know what to say to you guys, because planning and zoning is involved in this. And how in the world can we do that? How in the world can we do it? Because I'm not saying it's just a little bit off. It's 4 feet off at the southwest corner, 4 feet off. In fact, it has encroached, it's a boundary dispute with 4 properties on the south, 4 properties on the west, and it disagrees. It's a boundary dispute with the right-of-way of Elizabeth Avenue. So we got 9 property disputes on this one survey. And yet we're still approving it. Now, what we're headed for, looks like to me, is the owner. I've talked to the owner, and now we're talking about the owner should sue the city big time for allowing this to happen. City knowing that the survey is wrong, and city going ahead and proceeding with construction. It's crazy. I don't know. I guess I would say that you guys are nuts or idiots, but I can't say that. I would say that you guys are 5-star idiots for allowing this to happen. I can't imagine you doing it. I'm a registered engineer.
Thank you.
I'd like extra time on this, so you
Does anyone
respond.
want to give him extra time?
I do have a question for Brad, if that's possible. Brad, he mentioned that the survey hasn't, that you admitted that the survey has an error of 4 feet off. Is that true?
He's referring to a townhome subdivision called SNJ Oaks. There was a survey that was submitted with the site plan application. When you do a plat in the city of Titusville, you require a sketch plat, which has to come before the commission and the council for approval. And then the next stage, once that's approved, then you go through a preliminary plat. And that's really basically an engineered site plan. And so we have that review. And pretty soon we may receive the final plat from the applicant. What Mr. Johnson was referring to as far as that, that meeting that he and I had together was in response to many inquiries he had about this project, about the accuracy of a survey that was submitted initially. The applicant is well aware of some of the issues that were addressed by Mr. Johnston. Some of them we acknowledged are issues, but they weren't egregious issues. Like the width of the right-of-way. It's not affecting the property. Some of the other corners that he's talking about, that is something that
Are you saying that it is off?
all I know is that we've identified what we can based on the survey that was submitted to us. We provided that to the applicant, and they have to address it. They're just not at this stage to address it yet. And that's what Mr. Johnson's concerned about.
I'm concerned about, is it off by 4 feet? I think we hear this each week, and so I would just like an answer to it myself. And so that's my question. Is it off by 4 feet? Or I'm not sure how you phrased it, Mr. Johnston, but
The applicant has told us that there was some inaccuracies on the survey that was provided, but it's incumbent upon the applicant to provide an accurate survey when they get to the next stage. And then once they resubmit to us, then we'll review to make sure everything's accurate.
will
But
they have to do another survey?
That's possible,
Why is it possible and not they have to?
because
If
they've
it's
already
off.
gotten approval for a project right now for a site plan. And when they come in for their final portion, that's when we'll review to make sure everything's accurate.
But if
They're
we
not at
already
that
know it's
stage
not
yet.
accurate, why would we continue? Why wouldn't we stop and just get it fixed? And admit maybe there might have been an error and get it fixed and then move forward?
Because, ma'am, that's already approved, and so they're already in construction. Now, these are, sometimes that happens when you get a final plat and you see some errors or you see some discrepancies between that and the preliminary approval, the site plan. And if they're minor, those are things that could be changed during that process. We're not at a stage to verify any of that. All I have is based information that Mr. Johnston has given to us and to the applicant. We've met with the applicant many times about this already. They've been told they need to verify and provide this information to us. They have not done that yet because they're not at that stage yet. So I don't have anything more to provide to Mr. Johnston related to that, other than the questions I already met with him about.
I don't know if I can make a motion to give Stan 2 more minutes so that he can respond to this. Is that possible?
You can make a motion. Is there a second to Member Moscoso's motion?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. All negative, say no.
Okay. I do have a question for
He's
Brad.
granted another 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, here's what we have. We have in the city of Titusville, we have engineers, we have a surveyor. I try to talk to the surveyor and the engineer, Mr. Kevin Cook says he's not responsible for this. He hasn't been called on to do anything with this. So in other words, we have a surveyor here in the city of Titusville, and Brad Parrish and the community development has not checked with them. This survey is way off. It disagrees with a survey that's across the street, which I used to own. I used to own both of these properties, both sides of the street, my wife and I. And I know it's wrong. And like I said, the surveyors, they put wooden stakes up where there's no corners. There's no survey corners. This is crazy, absolutely crazy. And the thing is that how can the city allow them to continue to go forward, to put up buildings and so forth? And what I'm saying is, it's off of 4 feet, over 4 feet at the southwest corner. And not only that is, I explained to you, I put it in an affidavit. It's got 9 boundary disputes with property owners. So you've got to be crazy. I mean, he's got to be crazy. Who's he talking to? Who is Brad Parrish? He's not talking to the city surveyor. Can you believe that? In other words, he's saying all this, but he's not even talking to the city surveyor, who would disagree completely with what he says. What kind of organization do we have? Now, this has gone to the city manager. What does the city manager do? I mean, I'm there when people are calling, the residents are calling, saying, calling city manager, and he doesn't respond. He doesn't respond to this issue. I used to represent one of these homeowners, and they just gave up. They gave up because the city won't do anything.
Member Rogers.
Brad, when these plats are created, is it the city surveyor who goes out and does a survey, or do we take a survey that's a private survey done by the developer?
What is submitted to us has to meet statutory requirements, has to be signed and sealed per the statute. A final plat, we will verify.
Okay, but we don't verify it until the final stage.
That's when our surveyor gets involved. We don't go out in the property to verify what the surveyor's done.
Yeah, right. So they get their own surveyor, and then they bring that to us, and then we say, okay, based on the survey, okay, and they have to sign and seal the documents, I guess. But anyway, we don't send our surveyor to double check them.
Only if it's necessary.
Okay.
I can only see that in some rare occasions where it's absolutely necessary. There's been some instances where there was a plat that was approved and later on the survey came back wrong, or the plat came back wrong, or something came back, where we had to go back and amend the plat again. So they went through construction and it wasn't consistent with the final plat. And so you have a curved road, for example, that was paved
Yeah.
versus a straight road
That's
on a
it.
final plat. And so they had to go back and amend that.
That's it.
And so that requires having to go through that process again.
But that step is in the future, at this stage, always, it's in the future.
That can happen. That could happen with this project. We have to verify at each stage.
Right.
Whether it's consistent with the code or not.
Member Perez.
So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is just a process issue.
Correct.
Okay, so eventually it'll come down to verifying all the information. So I think we just have to wait until the process takes care of itself. And there is a way of correcting it.
I disagree.
Now, the question is the correction going to somehow inflict harm because things are in process, right? Construction or whatever. What happens then?
I can't bring in a hypothetical about what would happen. I mean, I just know that we have an approved site plan. Some of the issues that Mr. Johnson's brought up are minor, but he continues to bring them up. And we've met with him. So I'm not sure what else, I've asked and answered the questions to Mr. Johnson already. The issue as far as the process, it's still in the process. Right now, they have got an approved site plan to construct within the boundaries of that project. They're doing that per the approved site plan. We have to continue to inspect it during the development of that to make sure it's being done consistent with that site plan. When they come to us at the next stage of the final plat, it has to be based on what is improved there and within the boundaries, and based on if it has to be an updated survey, that's what we have to get. But that's just part of the process. If it has to be a major modification, then we'll have to work with the applicant to do that.
Member Childs.
I was just gonna say, did you call us idiots or?
Well, I think it would be super idiots on this particular, because, because we're talking about, yes, all of you guys, everybody here.
So I
Because
don't
what
think
we're
you're gonna
talking
get-
about, because the thing is.
We're
is that
volunteers.
The survey is way off. And the city, not only that, is the city has a survey that shows
All right,
it's
that's
way
enough.
off.
That's enough. I don't.
The city did it. City has a survey.
I understand, but you don't have to stand there and call us idiots when we're not the ones who did the survey. We didn't. We had something in front of us. Actually, I wasn't even the one who did any approval or recommended approval, but we didn't do any of this to you.
Chris,
or
I
to
sent you
anyone
many
else.
emails on it. Many emails.
Oh, I get all your emails.
Okay,
I
and
read
then,
them
and
too.
an affidavit said sworn
I've
and
talked
signed
to
by,
you
sworn and
personally.
signed by me.
And I don't go around calling you names either, so I don't really.
I'm trying to be
appreciate
truthful.
that. So I'm an idiot?
No, not an idiot, a super idiot
super
for
idiot.
allowing this to happen. This is not
That's
part of the
enough of you.
process.
All right.
A super
Member
idiot,
Faison.
all of you.
Member
Get
Faison.
rid of him first.
Brad, how long has S&J Oaks been under construction? Approximately, just approximately.
I want to say less than a year. I'm not sure. I'll have to look to see specifically.
So I drive by there very often. They haven't done a whole lot in months, except for clear the land and put some pipes in the ground. They haven't done a whole lot in months. So just for me, when he brings up S&J Oaks for right now, it's a mute topic. There's not very much construction going on. I don't know what's got that project on hold, but just letting you guys know, if you don't know where it's at, go down Park Avenue or DeLeon, turn down Queen Street, turn on Elizabeth, and take Elizabeth to a dead end. It's right there. You'll notice that not much construction has happened. So this is a mute topic for me.
Member Perez.
Well, I'm happy to understand now what this is all about, finally. Okay, so I'm thankful for that much, and I can also put it to rest. Thank you.
Member Moscoso.
Yeah, I just wanted clarity as well, and so thank you for that, Brad. But I don't feel like we should call something a mute discussion. I feel like every member of our community has the opportunity to stand in front of us, and it's our job to hear them.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you.
When they are civil.
When they're what?
Civil.
No, I'm being truthful. Who was that? Who said civil? Okay, listen, that is civil when you tell the truth.
Any other citizens to be heard? Y'all want to talk? No. Next item, item 11A, ADUs.
Mr. Richardson, you had asked that we bring this draft ordinance back so you could take a look at it, so the commission can make comment. This was something that, if you recall, we had many discussions about, and based on your recommendation to City Council, which they approved, we went ahead and drafted an ordinance. It is scheduled for hearings later this month, and we'll come back to you again as a public hearing. But what's before you today, right now, is just a staff report item for you to review it and make any comments on it. We've included the history of all your discussions about this topic on the agenda. This is on page 90 or 89 of your packet, rather. And then the ordinance begins on page 92. The conditions, I think you debated quite a bit, which are on page 93 of your packet. The only question that we hope that this is what was submitted to council. We went ahead and drafted it as an ordinance based on what you recommended. But one thing we wanted to ask you about real quick was the paragraph G and about parking, and whether that was your intent to restrict parking. Other than that, that's my question. I'll try and answer your other questions you might have as well. This is on page 93 of your packet.
So with letter G, the existing code does allow up to 2 parking spaces and at least 1. The modification that was discussed and voted upon by P&Z is to say no more than 1 off-street parking space shall be provided. And the question is, do you really want to take away that second spot?
We discussed it. Orlando has done it. They said up to 1. You could have 0 parking.
That's right.
So, and I think the other item, because it was Member Stokel and Member Cole that wanted to increase the lot size. And in fact, we saw in the video before the meeting that St. Petersburg and Orlando were actually reducing the lot size. And they explained why they are. I think council needs to see that video. They will understand what we did by reducing the lot size.
Is this a video that was presented to the P&Z?
Yeah.
Or shared with you?
At the 4 o'clock meeting.
Okay.
And I think it shows they haven't really understood what other cities are doing with ADUs. Am I not right, Member Faison?
Yeah, I agree. That I think it would be very, very beneficial for City Council to see that that lot sizes and reducing lot sizes as well as parking. I believe that parking was one of the concerns or items that are also addressed in the Live Local Act. That reducing the number of parking spaces also to help improve affordability. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Member Perez?
Yeah, I also like to triple that. The last part of that sentence says, in addition to the off-street parking required for the principal use. So really, we're talking about potentially 2 spaces anyway.
Member Rogers?
Everybody knows that I love this topic. And I will say the same things that I always say, and maybe one more. I still think the size range should be 200 to 600 square feet because, again, the tiny houses get all the way down to 125, 150, 180, that kind of thing. So I think that should be an option. Again, that's not going to be for a family of 5, but it's, for like a single person or a couple, especially young ones who can scamper up and down loft stairs. I think that's doable. I don't mean to tread on, I believe it was Member Perez's toes, but I don't understand why there was a focus on forcing the ADU to be a certain percentage of the main residence. To me, it seems like, and maybe this comes to lot size, sort of, but to me, it's just, why not just 200 to 600 square feet and then just kind of let the chips fall where they may on the ratio? I mean, obviously, you've got setback requirements, I assume, Brad, even for, for these ADUs, right? Yeah, right. So it's not like you can jam something massive up into the back corner. I mean, it's gotta fit the lot to a certain extent, but I don't know, to the ratio of obviously these are not gonna be bigger than the house probably, or maybe if the house is 600 square feet, they'll be the same size, but the one other thing that I think is a mistake that's made with some frequency is the idea of matching something architecturally to what's there already. And I get that in a historic district like this one around here, you want to be very careful with how things look. However, I come from a long line of architects, I mean a really long line of architects, and architects, registered architects, trained, they do some really interesting things with design. And sometimes, you'll find next to a traditional house a modern structure that riffs off of it in some way or complements it in some way, or takes the pitch of the roof or an element of a window or a door, duplicates it and makes it sort of look like it goes there, but it's a new kind of updated version. And I do think sometimes maybe the thing to do is not to insist that that what's new has to look exactly like what's old. Maybe what's new just needs to be, checked by a design committee or just designed by somebody with some training. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I do think sometimes it's, you may get something that looks kind of like the original, but it's not very good.
Vice Chairman Aton.
I agree on the parking. I think we went the wrong way. The goal was with this is to make it more conducive to building ADUs, and that seems to go the other direction. So yeah, I think all the way down to 0 was kind of the intent. And then the other one, I know we talked about it, but it's kind of still here, and it's kind of neither here nor there, but it does seem like it's a bit antiquated, is the Indian River City neighborhood carve out. I know the explanation that it was, historical and done at the time they carved out Indian River City, but at some point, just make that area adhere to the same as the rest of the city.
The answer for that one was not the historical reason. It was actually the prohibition on making any more restrictive code for 1 year from the law that created the 100-mile radius from the hurricane impacts. This was a different law that created that different requirement, and we decided not to touch that section of the ADUs.
When does that run out? When does that run out?
I think it's October 1, 2025.
Now you interpret.
Yeah. So,
Or 2024, I could be wrong.
either way, I thought you said it was a year moratorium, and it seems like more than a year since the hurricane, but whatever. Yeah, that was my only thing. Again, it's not, it's neither here nor there. It's just that kind of stuff bugs me that it's just hanging around. But if it is, it is.
Okay, so the two items are the parking and the minimum lot size. They wanted to expand it, and we recommended it stay at what?
But this doesn't address, is there a change in here for minimum lot size?
No, we didn't make a change here, since that was the council's discussion when this was brought up to them.
Member Cole and Member Stokel both made that point. So I guess we've got to be at the meeting next Tuesday.
So it's not advertised yet. This is the initial review for
Okay.
you all.
Intend to have it the first reading on the 24th, and I believe your public hearing on this on the 18th. So
back before us.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you'll have a formal request for a recommendation at your next meeting on this.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Is it expected that this will be modified to
No,
change the
this-
lot size?
This is what council asked for. They made suggestions and talked about increasing lot sizes and other things, but they didn't give a specific direction.
Okay.
So once they see this, that's when we'll know.
Okay.
I am still,
Next item is cities,
I was just gonna say.
Member Rogers.
I am still learning the, kind of like the process here, but is there any way to pass on my or our recommendations that the council can consider the size again, possibly the ratio, and possibly design parameters?
You'll get that chance again, because when this is advertised for public hearing,
Yes.
you'll have a public hearing at this commission asking you to make a recommendation to council.
Okay.
Yeah.
City staff report.
Just tomorrow night is our last of 3 meetings on the comp plan project that we've been doing. We're going to be at the Harry T. Moore Center talking about the Canaveral Heights neighborhood, or what we were initially calling the Titusville West neighborhood. And then once we conclude that meeting, we'll provide that input that we received from the public to City Council and ask them for direction on the amendments that we presented to you at your last meeting. If they go forward with it, then we'll just have a transmittal hearings, and that'll come before you again. And then you'll make a recommendation as to whether to send it to the state for at least a review. So that's all I have.
I have 2 questions for you. The ALF that we discussed at our last meeting on ingress and egress into Georgia Avenue and Silver Star Road came up before the Board of Adjustments and Appeals, I think it was Monday, and was withdrawn. Why was it withdrawn?
They had a variance request to allow stormwater drainage facilities inside a required landscape buffer. We reviewed that request, and there's actually a provision in the code that allows that to be reviewed and approved administratively. So we allowed them to go through that process. When we asked them to provide to us additional information to justify the change, they gave us some information from St. John's Water Management District that required them to put the drainage facilities where they're located because of the drainage pattern on the property. They also gave us evidence that they can adhere to the landscaping requirements while still allowing that drainage facility inside the required buffer. So their waiver was approved, and that negated the need to have to go for a variance.
So that it wasn't one of our agenda items. It came up in a citizens to be heard. And I have a question. Why wasn't ingress and egress on US 1? I know it crossed the bike path, but
That's why. There's the
bike path takes?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Where in the comp plan does it say we can't cross the bike path?
Doesn't specifically say that, but when we read the policies, we were asked by the state as to whether we would support a request to have we're typically asked this, that we will approve or would support a request to have a driveway crossing over a regional trail. So we look at several policies in the comprehensive plan and the code and in the bicycle pedestrian plan that was created several years ago, and we typically respond back that we don't support that if there's another alternative. They have another alternative to go to Silver Star.
So the bike path would take precedence over Georgia Avenue. Ingress and egress.
If they have another alternative, then it can use that.
Well, I know this is a different issue, but is Corral Palm still going to come up before us eventually?
I believe that they did resubmit, but they resubmitted as a planned development. So
Okay.
that's being re-reviewed.
Well, Corral Palms, in case anybody doesn't know, the founder of Temple Baptist and that whole area was Wendell Corral. And that was divided between what became Temple Baptist, and he had a big house and estate next to it. Then the next thing down will be the assisted living facility we've been talking about. So could they not go the route of through Temple Baptist to get an entrance and exit, and through, and neither one of them are major arterials. They could go the other way to Silver Star. I don't see why they couldn't have one entrance and exit on US 1 crossing the bike path. I seriously don't. That's what I think would make the most sense, is us to ask the state for special whatever to cross that bike path. Because it's going to happen in other areas eventually. It's going to happen. Instead of putting that traffic in an existing small neighborhood, which is Grove Park. I think it only makes sense. Member Moscoso.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure why we're approving projects that should go out to a collector or an arterial road, but that seems to be happening in the city. My question though is this Bristol project. I noticed it on the is it GIS? It's coming up, Bristol Development, for 1018. Could you give us a quick rundown on that, if it's possible?
That application has not been advertised yet, so we're not sure it's going to be on those dates. But it is a small-scale amendment. It's a comprehensive plan amendment application to change the commercial land use to a residential land use to allow a multifamily development.
I have one other question for you, Brad. And I'd see you're the major sponsor of the commission workshop on November the 3rd in DeLand. Is that right?
The Atlantic Coast section of the American Planning Association is helping sponsor that event.
But it's called Planning Commissioners.
It'll be, yeah, if you recall, you attended a workshop where we had a planning professionals workshop training event, and I believe you attended one of them. That's what that is. And it's going to be the same setup, but with different speakers.
It's for this body.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's November 3rd in the land. Will you give us more information about that?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I plan to do that.
Okay.
Plan to share it with everyone.
Any other questions? Member
I was
Rogers.
just going to make a comment. We are still in the posture that the Georgia Avenue ingress and egress is only going to be used for emergency vehicles, right?
The applicant indicated that's what they would propose. I have not verified whether they proposed that, and I have not verified with our staff whether that is acceptable or consistent with our code yet.
Thank you.
City Attorney.
Just a brief follow-up to Member Moscoso's question with the CUP ordinance at the beginning of the meeting. We had a meeting on December 8th, 2021, the Planning and Zoning Commission. I reviewed the video during other parts of this meeting this evening, and the CUP recommendation did come after a school CUP request that was approved. It was in the middle of the meeting before the developers agreement that came after that for Tranquility at 25-minute mark of that YouTube video. Then subsequent to that, on May 10th, 2022, Vice Mayor Jordan received the request from P&Z and directed staff to review all of our CUPs. Jumping ahead quite a bit in time, we reviewed the commercial CUP. We've divided the four types of CUPs into separate ordinances, so they'd each have their own ordinance, and you reviewed the commercial CUP revision that went before City Council for final approval on October 10th. The second one is the industrial that you reviewed tonight. That will go for final approval before City Council on October 24th. The third will be civic. Civic uses with conditional use permits are going to be heard for their final hearing on November 28th. That means you'll hear it sometime before Thanksgiving and at the same schedule, as long as it sticks to the current schedule. The residential would be the fourth CUP, so any CUP that's needed for residential use is on that same track as civic for 11/28/23 to be heard for its final second hearing before City Council, and that would wrap up that project.
Okay. Also, can you go over one more time, in the case of quasi-judicial, what we should not do?
I just happened to give a talk yesterday on quasi-judicial, and it was an hour long, so.
No, I'm not saying that.
What do you want me to tell you?
Basically, taking telephone calls, having meetings, lunches with people on an item that is quasi-judicial.
So, let me just do something real quick.
She's speechless.
I'm not speechless. I'm
Never
looking
heard
for
of it
something.
like that.
Yeah. Never heard her this quiet before.
Please explain the Constitution.
Oh, that's good. Really threw up all over this time, didn't you?
I do want to go home, I promise. Okay. Disclosure of ex parte communications and site visits. Ex parte communications are all forms of communication, verbal, written, electronic, regarding the subject of the quasi-judicial action made by or to a board member outside of the hearing and off of the record, as well as site visits by a board member to property subject to quasi-judicial action. Ex parte communications and site visits are presumptively prejudicial. Pursuant to Florida law, the City of Titusville has adopted a resolution that permits ex parte communications and site visits, conditioned on the disclosure of the communication or site visit during the quasi-judicial proceeding. If a board member does engage in an ex parte communication or site visit, the board member must disclose the nature of the conversation or visit at the beginning of the public hearing. So Resolution number 24-1997 was created to establish these rules because Florida law says you can only have ex parte communications if you have these rules. We have these rules. It's a long resolution that I can provide a copy to you. You should already have a copy of it if you can't find it. And it says that if you do end up engaging in ex parte communications, which either you did not intend to or it just happened to happen, then you must disclose it at the public hearing at the beginning. And the purpose of having this requirement is to eliminate any bias that you may have formed by having those communications or informations presented to you, either through the visit or conversation or the reading that you made. You have to announce any bias that you have formed. You have to announce who you have talked to. You have to announce the substance of what you have discussed. And that gives the applicant more of a level playing field to be able to rebut to you, the board member, any conflicts that you may have created in your head that they may be able to dispel with their testimony during that hearing. Because ultimately, it is the burden of the applicant to show you why you should vote on something and that there's substantial evidence to overcome whatever hurdles you may need to achieve that requirement or permission from the city. Is there anything specific that you want me to touch on?
And you had to look that up.
No, I just wanted to make sure I got it all.
Thank you.
I just had a question. The site visit, I mean, I think a number of us have, when something comes up, I think, what is that? Where is that?
Intentional. If you go somewhere intentionally, that you go out of your way to take note of a property, that would be something you absolutely must disclose. If you drive by something and notice it, I think it's common practice for the board members to say, oh, I've driven by that McDonald's. We're about to vote on it, but that, drive-by didn't form any basis of a bias or prejudgment in your mind. But if you go to, say, Brookshire and drive through it and, form opinions, spend some time, take some notes, that's going to be a substantial site visit, that you wouldn't have otherwise made. And that need, you need
Even if
to-
you don't talk to anybody.
even if you don't talk to anybody, a site visit is what it is.
Okay.
Just to clarify, and I don't do it, but I've heard other members mention it. So seeing it on the agenda and driving to the location to familiarize yourself is enough.
Worthwhile of making note of at the hearing.
So that's considered a site visit.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay if after it's come before the commission and something is done about it, you can tour around the city. And if it comes up, then you gotta disclose it.
Yeah.
Any further
Okay.
questions? Thank you.
I have no report. Any member having a report? Okay, the meeting is adjourned at 9:07.